Good afternoon. My name is Rose Adams. I'm the Secretary of Gecko Environment Council, and I'd like to welcome you all to our public forum examining commercial tourism development in national parks. I'll just firstly tell you a little bit about Gecko. Gecko was founded in Currumbin on the Gold Coast in 1989, and for the last 32 years we've been advocating for biodiversity protection, action on climate change, and sustainability of the natural and built environment. We also have a very active education arm where we nurture love and respect for the environment in children and older students. We champion access to public open space and for adequate space for our growing population that can be accessed by residents and visitors. And most importantly, we campaign on behalf of national parks for sufficient funding for maintenance and rangers, for effective management, for an increase in the land area under national park, and for strong legislative protection of their values, including restoration of the cardinal principle, and there'll be more on that later. Today's event builds on the success of the forum we held last year, which some of you attended, discussing national parks and ecotourism in parks. It was held as part of Gecko's Green Week, celebrating World Environment Day. And we find ourselves again celebrating another World Environment Day. At that time, we looked at the need for the Queensland government to honour its commitment made in 2016 and again in 2020 to double Queensland's national parks from the current 5.6% to 17%. As well, we looked at Queensland government's trend to open up, as they call it, our state, federal, and World Heritage listed national parks for private commercial tourism and ecotourism development, including glamping and resorts. So today we're digging a little bit deeper into such projects and their impacts. National parks are areas of high conservation value, and their primary purpose is to protect Australian native plants and animals and cultural practice. Visiting national parks is an activity people enjoy for many reasons, and we advocate minimum impact for this visitation, or encourage it. The saying, leave only footprints and take only photographs, sums up this viewpoint. From the beginning of national parks in Australia, professional guides have been taking visitors into the parks. However, over recent years, there's been a trend to encourage commercial development, especially accommodation within the parks. Queensland has only 8.24% of its land area protected, of which 5.6% is national park. The tourism development industry has access to the remaining parts of Queensland land area for their commercial developments. Commercial development within national parks is often controversial, and this forum will represent a variety of perspectives from those who enjoy our national parks, who work in this area, and the current government policies. Gecko's position is a preference for tourism infrastructure to be located outside the boundaries of national parks, and for the clients of such business to be given access to the parks in the same way as the general public, though with professional guides providing information and interpretation. Some other matters raised on this topic include increasing impacts on the biodiversity values within our parks, especially those with World Heritage and wilderness areas. Areas set aside for the exclusive use of commercial operators, excluding the public, and the activities of other guides and their clients. And also, there's the consideration of the potential loss to local businesses from the custom of tourists if they reside in the park. So we're honoured to have, we planned 4 expert speakers. We only have 3 at the moment. Dan Brown is flying up from Melbourne, and we hope he gets here for his slot. So our speakers will be sharing their years of experience and knowledge about national parks, and also their views on commercial activities in the parks. We did issue an invitation to the Environment Minister, Megan Scanlon, to attend, but she was unable to. We invited representatives from the Department of Environment and Science and from Tourism, but they declined to attend today. So I think we've covered the question and answer. We'll move on to the greeting to country. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Justine Dillon, a proud Kombumerri woman who will offer the greeting to country. She's also our first speaker. Justine is a Kombumerri a traditional owner, custodian of Gold Coast, North Stradbroke and Moreton Island, who works as a project manager of the Narangwal Gold Coast Aboriginal Association. And Justine will be speaking on the cultural importance of national parks. Thanks, Justine. If this isn't the right height, you can just pull it up and down. Thank you. The slides, just the left and right. It is
okay,
on.
cool. Thank you. Yin Kayala Managu. My name's Justine Dillon. I'm a Kumameri Nunakul Nugi traditional owner. The Gold Coast is my father's country. He was Kumameri. He also had bloodline ties to North Stradbroke Island and Moreton Island. My mother is also a traditional owner from Moreton Island and North Stradbroke Island. My father has been deceased now for about 6 years, where I succeeded his role managing Narangwal Gold Coast Aboriginal Association Incorporated and the Gowanaba Indigenous Protected Area. I'll just finish off my welcome first by paying respects to my elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the culture, dreams, hopes for my people across the nation. So we pay respect to my Kumameri ancestors here on the Gold Coast. So today I want to share my experience working on country. I have taken up this role for the last 7 years, running the Indigenous Protected Area, consulting on country. I have a teacher's background originally and have merged that with my culture heritage knowledge over 36 years working and living on the Gold Coast. That 36-year connection of unbroken connection to country with my family gives me specific rights to talk for my country, which is Aboriginal law and protocol in our tribal nations, is that you only get to speak for country when you live on, work and maintain that unbroken connection. Otherwise, that devalues the people who have never left country, those traditional owners that have maintained and stayed where they belong. So I do have a presentation as well. Which one?
It's on just left and right.
Left and right? Okay. Oh. Keep going a few.
I'll let you.
Yeah.
So you know where. So the arrow.
There we are. All right, so I create these presentations and share them around in local schools. So I teach pre-prep, primary school, I've taught high school, I've taught the teachers, I teach university students and lecturers and tutors and alike. I teach some cultural competencies on country and cultural engagement, so how to engage students through the curriculum with Kumameri protocol and processes. As a teacher and local, I have certain knowledge that I can share with teachers to support them. But my role working at Indigenous Protected Area, we are declared a private property. We got that land, the government helped us purchase it and then gave us 5 years to get a management plan on it, otherwise we had to give it back to them. We got an Indigenous Protected Area status within a year of securing that land from ILC, Indigenous Land Corporation. From there, we have managed and owned that through Narangwal for the last 21 years. We're one of the first Indigenous protected areas in Australia and one of, they say, one of the best managed, even though we're one of the lowest funded. So we do all right with what we have. Our work at national parks has been limited. We have not had access before my time. My dad and my grandfather, Graham, petitioned for almost 50 years to get work and some status in the parks and a co-design effort. It's only now in the last few years that government agencies are looking at co-design working with traditional owners and hearing what we have to say. I have shared this presentation internationally as well, so I've got a lot of notes in there just to help people understand local expectations of culture and things I've learnt while I've been on country. So that one too is a few things about always ask a person about their Indigenous heritage, how you want to be identified. No one goes out and assumes your identity. It's actually against the law. So I try and teach people first steps is respecting identity by asking what do you want to be identified as, an Aboriginal person, First Nations, Indigenous, because some of those terms can be offensive to different people. So you just kind of need to ask the individual. And also using things like capitalising the word Aboriginal, so we make sure it infers to our Australian Aboriginal people, not the Aboriginal people all around our planet that that are First Nations people as well. All these photos too are from our work around and on the Gold Coast in parks and our protected area and at schools. This is part of our beautiful valley in Gowanaba. If anyone knows where Gowanaba Valley is, if you've been up to St Bernard's or Tambourine, looking down the rainforest gully, that's us. There's a bunch of us girls down there brush cutting, pulling weeds and planting a heap of native trees in the rainforest. It's quite lovely. I've got definitions up there for terms that I say and use and terms that government use so that I can fit in their arena and use their definitions to connect with them, like a traditional owner. My family doesn't like me using that term, but I use it because that's what the government defines me as, someone who has an unbroken connection to my area and has maintained that. And that's a term they use. My uncles get a bit upset, that's fine. But we also shorten that by saying TO. So we'll say that quite often, TO. And when I refer to country, country's just not the landscape. Country's all-encompassing. It's everything. It's the people. It's the culture. It's the environment. It's the elements. It's everything that around us is country. And so I'll leave those definitions as well. I'll be able to share parts of this. Again, it is just my experience on country from the work I've done in the last few years and my lifetime, what I've learnt. Again, a lot of people have misconceptions. They weren't taught in school. That's where I come in and can reteach and get people educated on our culture, heritage, history. The Gold Coast has a hidden history of heritage where we did suffer an attempted massacre of our tribe. So I do educate on these statistics because it needs to be brought out to light. It can no longer be hidden. My people need to heal. The way we do that is we talk about it, we bring it up. Attempted massacre here, we've moved on, but we need to bring up that the fact is we've only got a small tribe of 500 on the Gold Coast compared to North Stradbroke Island. My other tribe has 3,000 people. That's a big difference with area. So we have a lot of displacement and development since settlement in this area. Our family struggled to maintain their place. We were told by my aunties to dress, talk, get educated, just like all the non-Indigenous people in our area, and fit in so we didn't lose where we've come from. So we did that for many generations until the last few years we felt a cultural shift where we're welcomed and want to be acknowledged and people are valuing our input. So I'm trying to build up the confidence in my family to let them know people want to hear about our connection to country. They want to know our cultural information about the areas we know on the coast that we grew up on. I predominantly grew up around Helensvale, Runaway Bay, Paradise Point area. We were always at the beach every weekend fishing, so I have a very strong saltwater connection. It's only in the last few years I'm working out in the rainforest and building my freshwater country connection in the rainforest, and I can tell you that my dreaming and country is just showing itself to me. The more work I give back to the land, the more land and country looks after me. Like, I feel I'm working in some of the most remote, dangerous places on the Gold Coast with every dangerous snake and spider you can imagine in Australia, and we feel protected. We've had no incidents in 7 years, no bites, no stings, no trips, falls, nothing. We feel like we have ancestors watching and protecting us because we're giving back every day to country and we're educating community about what we do for country. So the protected area at Gowanaba is our site to connect to country because we can't use sites like the Bora Ring or the top of Burleigh Mountain where my women's birthing area is because they're too commercial, tourist spots. It's not private. We can't connect up there. I'm not going to sit up there and try and do a ceremony with the smoking and connect while there's people walking the track looking, going, what are you doing? Like, that doesn't fit in with my cultural heritage belief at all. I need privacy, security and comfort. So there's lots of things have to change. I've included this beautiful poem from my great auntie Uduradu Noonuccal, Auntie Kath Walker. I always highlight the very last line, which is my favourite. Till a world of workers from shore to shore as equals live at last. That should be everyone's ultimate reconciliation goal, so I always like to include that poem. I think it's really amazing. United we win, so if you want to look it up afterwards, Auntie Kath Walker, please do. She has a lot of amazing poetry and activists for community, culture and the environment. Her family is still very active in that arena. Yeah, so we're very fortunate recently too. Just this year, we're kicking off the Coombe Rangers. So the first time the Gold Coast has had an Indigenous Ranger crew. We are not the same as Parks or Council. We are a separate entity. We do not have their scope of works on our scope of works. We created our works based on the needs of what we've seen around the Gold Coast. So specifically, it will be working the Burleigh Springbrook corridor was on our program, Goanna Bar Indigenous Protected Area, along with all our other cultural sites like Coombe Park, where our burial ground is. Our main focus being that corridor of importance all the way up to Springbrook. Springbrook's our medicine man mountain. It's part of our culture heritage law. I'm forbidden from going up there at night time without one of my family, a male elder, escorting me. I broke law and I've seen things I shouldn't have up there. That place is scary, and it lets me know every time I try and break that law going up at night to not try that. It is very sacred, and Medicine Man is active. The spirits up there are always watching. I've had elders from the Atherton Tablelands reaching out to us about our weather, saying it's like elders trying to cleanse country. I'm like, we feel that too. Don't worry, we have those connotations that we feel there's unrest with our ancestors, with all the things happening on their country. Again, main rule, I tell everyone, tread lightly on country. We don't take more than you need. We've been taught that. We are sustainable people. We always made sure our resources replenished. There was no greed and taking from others and other country that wasn't yours. It was a respectful union between tribes. I've heard stories of the only time there was fights and wars was when one of our Coombe fellas stole a Stratty woman and brought her back to country to marry her, and mob would chase him, and obviously the woman would escape and go back to her mob because us Stratty girls, we fight back. So there's lots we've learned on country working in. So this Coombe Rangers is a way for us to get in and put our stamp on country, have our say finally about what country needs, revegetation of it, and how our people can give our traditional owner knowledge. So an example of traditional owner knowledge I got funded for through a few grants was we're aiming to eradicate the toads from Goanna Bar Creek. I learnt through traditional knowledge that the Lomandra longifolia is a natural fence line along your creek. So we made a natural fence line, and we know that the toads can't, once they bush out, the toads can't jump through that bush, they get stuck, whereas our native froggies go hop straight into the water and keep breeding. So that traditional owner knowledge secured us a bit of grant money to be able to action that on the protected area, and now we've got strong Lomandra lines, natural fencing all the way along the creek to stop those toads getting in and breeding. We went from having over 50,000 toads on site, little toadlings hopping everywhere, to the last 2 years, none of them, no toadlings at all. We have curbed that whole population through traditional owner work. So we love to show that evidence of things, little things that we know. I always tell a lot of the women I work with, when I started it was us girls, and we went from being stay-at-home mums to working on country. Big shift. Getting used to working outdoors was different without a toilet, so we found the native raspberry was a natural remedy for any stomach issues. We were picking out on them, and now we don't have any stomach issues and can work outside for hours without any issues or worry. That anxiety eased too, so we're just finding things that the more we work, the more we discover, and we don't want those opportunities taken away before they're developed. So I want to be able to get into the Burleigh Springbrook corridor and really evaluate what cultural and environmental values in there before any works or anything starts in there. It's so important to us. And I also mentioned during that article to the reporter that I think they need to talk to a lot of the landholders that reside in those valleys and areas and see what they want. They've moved there and resided there for a reason, to get away from the city and escape the hustle and bustle, not to have it brought to their front door. So that's something we need to consider too. Our views are there, but like I've said in many forums, like other things on country that are being developed that we got invited late to, I said, at the end of the day, I said, you're not listening to us, you're not hearing us and what we want. But that's nothing unusual to us. We're quite used to that. It's been generations of it now. We don't know when that's going to change, but we'll keep showing up and saying what we want. we get railroaded constantly. Native title changes a lot of our views because that's people that aren't from this area speaking on our behalf. So that's usually where government is pushed to through legislation to contact the native title body. I'm not part of that body. My family isn't part of that body. So how do we get our foot in the door to say anything anytime? This is what's locked us out for years. So I've had information there about waterways. That's our Goanna Bar IPA. Our main threats are toads and wild dogs, which half are dingoes. So we don't kill them. We're the only site in that suburb that doesn't kill any animals. Toads we take to water gums to get rid of humanely and use for studies. Challenges, never-ending. Council, I'll get through. I work with a lot of great people in council and a lot of the units are wonderful, but I need to break through the main mayoral office and say, like, you need to listen to my people. This is what we need on country. I even created a Kumameri Protocol document, which I should have put up to tell people in government what my family expect and want on country. They said it's the first in the world, in Australia, that they've seen. It's not the first I've seen. It's just the first one I've sent out to all of them. Because I've got Yugarapul's one, Yuggera's one, Jaggera's one. I've got one from up North Queensland of Aboriginal Protocol documents. They're just not well known or shared in government because, again, is our opinion valued and what we want on country? This is what I'm working towards with the people who have their heads right in government. So that's the Bora Ring up down on 6th Ave, that's a men's area. Cultural law predates. I'm not to enter as a female, neither should, if you want to respect and believe our culture, you should, as a female, not enter that space either. It's said to be a generational curse upon your fertility. And if you are to visit it outside that circle, you need to be invited there by a Kumameri male. Otherwise, that is breaching our cultural law and bad things can happen. Our women's birthing area, my goal is to work with parks and try and get access to that site on the top of Burleigh Mountain so that us women, non-Indigenous and Indigenous, can access it for natural healing. We have that right. The men have their site, what do we have? And yeah, so that we utilise Goanna Bar Indigenous Protected Area in the meantime. So these are just pictures from the site where I drag the kids out on holidays when they're bugging me to come pull weeds. So welcome anyone who has grannies at, school holidays, bring them out. We welcome everybody as long as you respect what we're doing on country and take your rubbish with you, obviously. My family comes out, we have family days. This is our space. We ideally would like to use other spaces on country. Parks, national parks would be ideal for us to get into, but yeah, we've still got that barrier. So I've been hoping with the Kumameri Rangers we can change that narrative a bit and start to have more say in national parks through our ranger program because we don't align with the other groups. Ours is separate and we're supported by federal government and the state government in our initiatives. So I'm going to keep pushing as much as I can. And yeah, I'll wait to the Q&A to ask for any questions, but I hope that I've enlightened some people and helped with some local cultural information and just let people know, like, our stance is we want to maintain the cultural values and the environmental values that exist. We don't have much left on the coast in our eyes, so it's our job to protect what's left, our natural assets. So I just want to thank you for your time as well, and yeah, I'll hang around to the end with Ranger Lily, who's from the Kumameri Rangers, is here with me, my Kumameri cousin as well, and we'll be here to help with any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Justine. I think that was very interesting information you shared with us. And I hope it builds with a greater respect of Australian Aboriginal culture, and particularly the local area, the Kombumerri people. Our next speaker, we're really honoured to have Peter Ogilvie. We might call him the grandfather, the father of national parks. His presentation is on the emergence, use and abuse of national parks. Peter Ogilvie has had 46 years of direct involvement in the management and administration of national parks, wildlife and World Heritage properties in Queensland. Much of it in the manager roles with statewide responsibilities. He has had close involvement with the establishment of nature conservation legislation and was a member of the Australian negotiating team for the Convention on Biological Diversity. He is currently State President of the Wildlife Preservation Society of Queensland. Thank you, Peter. Well, thank you, Peter. That was excellent to get such a historical perspective of where we've come from, and I think we can view the current attitude towards park as retrogressive compared to the inspiration that led to more and more protection. Our next speaker, we're doing really well, we're ahead of time. Our next speaker is Sonia Underdahl. She's speaking on commercial tourism development in national parks, what's happening in Australia. Sonia is a researcher for private commercial tourism development in protected areas, including national parks. A Gold Coast-based domestic and international award-winning guide and assessor, Sonia has also worked as a ranger manager for the Routeburn Great Walks, Fiordland National Park, New Zealand. Thank you, Sonia. What time do you want me to let you know? Just 10 minutes in. 10 minutes in, okay, so it's just after 1:15. Do you want me to ring the bell? Yes, that'd be great. Okay.
Okay, hi everyone, how are you? I see a lot of friendly faces. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the land we stand on, and the ancestors, past, present, and Indigenous for future. Thank you very much for letting me come today to speak to you. My speciality, as we spoke about before, is commercial tourism development in national parks, which is what we're talking about today. So I've got a little slide up here, and your first challenge, we're hoping the lights might dim just a little bit more because a lot of my slides are a bit hard to see. Which one of these do you think is commercial tourism development? Because we've talked about commercial tourism development. What is it? We've just listened to Dr. Ogilvie give a wonderful speech. Which one of these? You can see Keisuke, he's one of the head guides in Australia and internationally, sitting up the back in his lovely green uniform. There he is again. So let's have a look at what it isn't. That's easier. Wow, okay. If we can have these lights just here dimmed, that would be great, because it's quite dark, isn't it, on the screen? Okay, so there we go. Fantastic. What isn't it? So the first thing is you and me, when we go camping, that's not commercial tourism development. It's definitely not individual hiking. There's a group of ladies with a bushwalking club going for their nice walks. My mother, who's just, I don't know where she is. Where are you, Mum? Oh, there you are. So she was head of the bushwalking club. So I'm using some of her photos, yeah? That's not commercial development. What about up here? Have a look at this. There's a bus here, and there's a couple of guides. They've got some visitors. They're having lunch. That's also not commercial tourism development. Because like Dr. Ogilvie said, they're based outside the park. They drive in, they do their tour, and they leave. So let's have a look at the next slide. Which one of these is commercial tourism development? What are we talking about today? What exactly is it? Is conservation program commercial tourism development? It's a new trend in Australia. What we're doing is we're actually saying we will take this entire property, which is National Park, which you and I own, and we're going to conserve it. We're going to do a breeding program, or we're going to do surveys, or we're going to do, eradication programs. And in exchange for that, you're going to let me put my little tiny hut just over here. And the only people who can come in here is my company and my guests. Are we doing that? Yeah, we've already got that throughout Australia. We've got various properties that do that in our national parks. So conservation programs can actually be commercial tourism development. Visitor centres, yes. Yep. Campground, yep. Tracks, trails, toilets, accommodation. You heard Dr. Ogilvie speaking. We've got the first 2 resorts, yeah, up in Spices, just up here, Main Range. You want to go in? There's a sign. It says private, guests only. That's our park. So accommodation gondolas. Anyone heard of, what's that called? Nature Link, is it? Yeah, they keep trying to stick the bloody gondola up there. Oh, I said a naughty word, didn't I? They do stick that gondola. They keep talking about it and it keeps coming backwards. And they're talking about it again. You would have seen Justine Dillon talking about that and saying it's not acceptable use of our national park. She spoke out in the Gold Coast Bulletin. You would have seen that. Mountain bike trails. If you go in on your own, that's all good. But these are mountain bike trails that are owned by a company that is digging up and making a circuit for their own profit. That is commercial tourism development. Okay, then we've got viewing platforms like Mamu, right up near Cairns. They've got huge viewing platform there, $10 million we paid for that. And that viewing platform we pay, we can go in. A dollar of that goes to the Indigenous owners in the history. That is, in that situation, commercial tourism development, because it's for profit. So you're starting to get an idea, yeah, of what we're talking about today, zip lines. Okay, so that's what commercial tourism development is, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about global. Where do we stand on the world stage? Is this normal? Is this okay? So one of the examples we always use are African examples. In Africa, we've got a variety, predominantly NGOs. They are dealing with poverty eradication. They're not a wealthy First Nation, developed, educated, with a stable political system, stable regulatory body. They're dealing with completely different issues. Did you know that their rangers have life insurance because they get shot? Okay, they're dealing with a completely different system to what we're dealing with here, and they need the money. So they put resorts in, they do conservation, the NGOs are in there. But there's been a withdrawal of support by a lot of communities. They're rioting at the moment. At the moment, they're burning cars. That's what we do when we're rioting, right? You see the difference between Australia? So what they're doing is they're saying we're not making any money. People in the communities nearby, the regional communities, are not making money because people go from the airport to the resort, stay in the resort, get fed in the resort, do the tours in the resort, run around the national park, back to the resort and back out on a plane. So the local community is not benefiting, and they're against that. Kenya, they even tried to do PPP, which is private commercial tourism development in their parks, and they got accused of selling it off because the developers are paying big money. New Zealand, Australian government loves New Zealand. I was a ranger manager of New Zealand, of the Routeburn, which they love to talk about how wonderful it is. What a great practice, best practice example by the state and the federal government. Let's have a look at some realities. See down the bottom there, it says Federated Mountain Clubs of New Zealand report. What date is that? 2020. They have had so many court actions. They have gone through formal apologies to the public for poor management. What have they done wrong? Oh, name it. Imagine something, yes, they've done it. So New Zealand's quite interesting. They've got reporting errors, lack of transparency, sweeteners they call it. $250,000 was given to a kayaking fund. Technical service, these are the huts, they continually expand them. They started off small, we call it thin edge of the wedge, when you get in and then it expands from there. So these are some of the issues. New Zealand is definitely not an example of good practice. At the moment, the tourism organisations are trying to tunnel under the national park, trying to put in a tunnel so that their customers can get to the top of the track and start their tour quicker. Okay, so good practice. You've got to be careful when they flick New Zealand at you. I love New Zealand when they do that. How many have we got in the world? How many commercial tourism properties? Are there tons? You know? Have a look. What's your guess? Anyone who chose number 6? You're right. Used to be about 250, gone down to 200, hoping it'll keep decreasing. Countries like China, they just pick up the entire resort, the accommodation facility, everything, move them out. That's not really a good practice, by the way, that's forcible eviction. Okay, and we have that a lot because there's money with parks if you can have it all to yourself. So China's also moving out. Within the world, about 200. And that's according to Dr. Buckley, who knows a thing or two about national parks. He's an expert on it. In or out of our parks, this is Australia. Have a look. How much do you know about your parks and the properties? Ayers Rock, is that inside the park? No, it certainly is not. I'm seeing a lot of people going, no. The only two which are in the park, O'Reilly's Green Mountain Campground, and that was a historical campground. That was already there, remember that? A lot of you are nodding your heads. Yep, you've been there. Then it became a bit hard to manage. They asked if anyone wanted to take the tenders. O'Reilly's really didn't want to. It's just another thing they've got to manage, but they took it over and they expanded it. Next one, Spices. You heard Dr. Ogilvie speaking about that. First time, absolute first time we have developed for private profit in a park. And when did it happen? A couple of years ago. How many of you knew about it? A couple of you. Not enough. A lot of people didn't know because they didn't do a big public consult. Okay, so the rest of it, Undara, that's tenure. They had a private property and then they got to hand that back to the government. The government said, look, you can keep the business and you can keep your house and we'll take the rest back as park. So that's a tenure transfer. Hey? Yeah, well, I'm not going to go into the cattle. We've got a few issues with national parks. So we'll stick with development for now, but yes. These are all places which are currently problematic in Australia. Have a look, and the list is growing. Latest one, which is in court, Mount Wellington, it is delayed till August. We've also got Hinchinbrook. Hinchinbrook's not over. If you're being complacent, you think that's all done with, that lease is still sitting there. It's not taken off the table. They're waiting for somebody who will then tick it off and sign it, and it will go through. Luckily for us, Indigenous are holding the fort there. Stradbroke Island, remember they had the truth protest up there? They were the ones who held that off. So we've got Kangaroo Island. That was huge. That was a private developer. He went to court. The community took him to court. And while they were in court, in the Supreme Court, they changed the law of South Australia to say it actually doesn't need any community consultation. We don't need to ask community at all. Remember Dr. Peter Ogilvie said there's a little clause there? That's the problem. So that got wiped off the board. They'd fought it through the Supreme Court. No one won. They're developing. Okay, so we've got Cozzy, we've got 3 Capes Track, we've got Yarra Ranges in court at the moment, Mount Cootherwee protested and stopped, all the rest of it. Springbrook Nature Link cablecast keeps popping up, and hypothetically there are meant to be 5 more developments going up in the main range. They don't need to talk to us. They don't need to communicate or consult with us. Okay. There you go, there's your Tasmania. This is a government document, and it basically says, yes, the best jurisdictional experiences or models that we can come up with is Tasmania and New Zealand. Here's Tasmania, this is their hut in the national park. This is one of 3 the same size, and this is listed as best practice. Hey? Yeah, well, look, today what I'm talking about is commercial tourism development. We'll take one at a time. There are many, many issues. So, this here is one of 3 huts, and it is listed here as an exemplary way to protect and conserve nature in national parks. There you go. Types of tourism, we've had a look at that. Historical, O'Reilly's is historical. They were there first. National park came later. It's a bit of a donut. Yeah, and then we've got tenure change, we've got new ventures. We'll flick through, that's a bit boring. These are some of the problems. Most of them you already know, they say they're doing this for employment. So we'll have a talk about that later. But first, Dr. Ogilvie did mention the Jackson report. This one here is federal. It's run by the National Long-Term steering committee. Is that right, sir? He's like having a look at me. He's watching me. So basically what the Jackson report was Tourism Australia, not ecologists, not environmentalists, not community, writing a report and saying the property assets with significant tourism potential, such as national parks and heritage buildings, are administered for non-tourism purposes and are not released or made available to tourism operators. We need to change it. And you know what? They did. You heard what happened. So what happened after that? Well, we went into maximum development processes. The pipeline was full of applications. And we've basically now, 2013, we get to have a look. This is from Spices, their Scenic Rim Trail. This is one of their PowerPoints at an ecotourism forum, boasting about their conservation and ability to protect in national parks, but it's also talking about the process and how they were able to do that. You can't blame the company. Who's allowing it? That's what you've got to look at. And so challenges to date, basically they had a change in government, and Dr. Ogilvie spoke very clearly on the NCA, and that allowed this to happen. Expression of interest is when the government sends out a document and says, anyone out there interested, you can develop. We're looking for a process for somebody to come in to redevelop the Lamington National Park, the existing QPWS Green Mountains campgrounds, Lamington National Park, and this is what it looks like, and they send it out. Have a look over here. We're also looking for people to develop the Thorsburn Trail, the Cooloola Great Walk, Whitsunday Island Trail. That's what it looks like. That's the government document. And then tourism operators respond and say, hey, I can develop, no problem. So we call that expression of interest. Who's interested? We'll help fund it. And the government says, here, the proposals are confidential. So you and me, we don't need to know about that part. Okay? And it's governed by probity for the process, treated as commercial in confidence or CIC. That means we don't have any access to the lease details or the amounts, things like that. Okay, this is Eco Trails, very, very popular at the moment. You can just see I screenshotted off the computer. Dr. Ogilvie was speaking about the Cardwell Tropical Mountain Bike Network, Cooloola Great Walk, they're fighting, Wangeti Trail, Palama to Wallaman Falls. Spices is not put on there because it's not upcoming, it's done. Except for the 5, which are sitting to the side somewhere, non-consult. Okay, we went through the documents, or I went through them. You don't have to read them. They're pretty boring, aren't they? Government documents. So let's have a look. This is the best practice development guideline by the Australian government. Actually, it's the Queensland government, by our government. Best practice case studies, Lady Elliot Island. That was strip mine, basically. Phosphate mining? Yeah. Whole island, that's right. The entire island. Flattened. Quarantine station, historical. And South Salus, Ningaloo Reef, privately owned with a historical lease. Wilson's Prom is actually inside the town. It's not in the park. Of all these examples, not all of them, all but one, are adjacent, historical or tenure. The only one which they consider to be best practice is Scenic Rim Trail, which is us, you, me, Gold Coast, Scenic Rim. So let's have a little look. This is Cooloola, they're protesting at the moment. That's Sunshine Coast, yeah? We asked the Australians, do you like this? Is this what you guys want? You know, or is this just a greenie initiative? Well, it's not. 85% of Australians support an increase in government funding for national park management because the government says we're going to develop, then we can get some money. But the Australians say, 85% of the Australians say, you want more money? Just ask us. We're happy to provide. Don't have to develop. And 78% do not support commercial tourism developments in parks. Okay. So community has spoken on that. Jobs, they like to say about jobs, we've got some of the top guides in Australia turning up from some of the biggest companies. Not one of those guides have agreed that this is a good process. In fact, it's pushing us out of business. How can you compete? They've got a resort inside the park. Are they making jobs? 15 people go on one tour. Have a look here. You get 2 guides, left column, this one here. You get 2 guides, maybe a lodgie, maybe somebody's there cleaning, but usually the guides do it. Who cooks the meals? You're lucky if you get a chef in some places. Usually the guides do the cooking. So far I've got 2 guides, 1 lodgie, 1 chef. Everything's in-house. All the food, alcohol, everything's in-house. Does community win from it? No. Here's Life's an Adventure. You can see his cap. Is it a promo? No, it's not. It's a very good example, and it's a factual example. That's why I'm mentioning them. Here's Life's an Adventure, same trail. 2 guides on track, 6 in accommodation because they stay outside the park. Right? Then they've got someone cooking, 3 community when sick or busy, 2 cleaning ladies, local as possible, plus they use restaurants, cafes, they attend events, you know, all of that sort of stuff. They're not eating in-house. They're going out into community and going, that's a great local restaurant, let's use it. So who's winning on this economically? It's not rocket science, you know. So let's have a look, generating revenue. This is Mamu. So they use Mamu as a good practice example. Mamu's tricky. Mamu is the great big walkway up in Cairns. It cost us $10 million to build. We were meant to have 40,000 people visit and, you know, it was going to generate money. 13,157 people went through the gates. It ran at such a loss, $650,000 a year. It was costing taxpayers to boost it. Indigenous get $1 for every person who comes through. 13,000 is not a big revenue for them either. That's not sustainable, not for anyone. And so what we ended up doing was offloading it to Paranilla Park. We begged them, can you take it? We'll help pay for it. Can I see the lease? No, it's commercial in confidence. It's between you and me. I don't know. Sorry, between the government. So basically, we suffered a significant loss. We probably still do. It's not generating money. These are just some little tiny numbers of our funds going to supporting these projects. These are just some of the small ones. It's not the entire amount. Okay, so government amounts, 450 million in New South Wales, Ben Boyd 250,000, 11 million for Yarra Rangers. This is our taxpayer money. Okay, if we visit, we conserve it. A lot of people say if you visit, you conserve. Historical academia will show, yes, that is the case. Nowadays, we now say that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of people that visit, go on tours, go on a cruise ship, walk through the forest. Do they come back? Are they greener? We should have converted half the world by now. Okay? It's not necessarily accurate anymore. And Dr. Scott provided that lovely quote there, which says, it supports research funders and position of researchers. You know, it depends, it's statistics. Action plan, this is what you guys right now need to pay attention to. This is 2022. This is what's happening. They've got a 100-day plan to push through developments in our national parks. So welcome. The action plan for tourism recovery, for the big boys in the front and a couple of the oldies, you'll recognise the name. Liz Savage, she's Intrepid Tours. Yeah. Andrew McEvoy, I think Tourism Australia. Brett Godfrey. We've got some people going, He's the one that made that big lodge. Remember the hut I showed you before, the little picture of the hut? He's the owner. He also did Kangaroo Island. He also is looking at developing Uluru. And he's on the board with these other big boys. And so this is their action plan. And just here is where ecotourism comes in. And this is to identify a land adjacent to national parks or within protected areas for potential for tourism development. So they are doing this within 100 days, it's immediate action. And that for me is quite disconcerting because I run in tourism, it is my blood, I support ecotourism, but I certainly can't justify going into a park and developing it for private profit. I think the community will benefit when we are based outside and we work inside. And if they want conservation, pay for it. It's our park, pay for it. We shouldn't have to rely on external people to come in and do conservation in our own property. I think I've gone over time now.
2, we are actually ahead of time.
They don't want to hear me talk anymore, do you? There's the Spices guests only. This is located, taken by a lady in the audience here. This is actually her photo. She went walking, she went for a bushwalk and came across the sign. And it says, Spices guests only. Yeah, private property. This is the consultation for Spices. If I'm going to go to your park, your local park down the road, and I want to put a little hut in there, yeah, I just decided it's a really nice park, maybe Burleigh. How many people would I have to ask in community to get permission? 10? 20? Would you expect like a survey of the Gold Coast to see how you guys actually feel about it? Yeah? So Spices, they sent off 33 letters in the mail, and then they contacted 13 people by email. And then they went and stood up in Cunningham's Gap. Here's a picture of him with his little hut, his little tent. And there he is. I'm sure it was right at the back of the car park in Cunningham's, not that I said that. So he talked to 12 people, and it got the big tick for community consultation. So I'm going to ask all of you, is it all right if I now move in down near maybe Burleigh? I'd like a nice little front yard, little porch. Is that okay with all of you? Because I would then be consulting more people than this to develop inside our parks. So I think you're getting the picture. I sound terrible, don't I? I sound really negative. But I think you need to know. Okay. The other condition is there have to be no alternatives. So that's in our principle, in the documentation. Alternative sites offering an equivalent experience should not be reasonably available outside the national park. Well, hands up, guides. Okay, Scare, put your hand up. How many of you are working outside the park and delivering exactly the same service? No alternatives. If you can show there's an alternative, it shouldn't happen. This is Life's an Adventure. Life's an Adventure is one of the top 5 most expensive, luxurious, glamping, multi-day hikes we have in Australia. And do you know what? They don't develop in the parks. They are located outside. And this is the Spices trip. This is actually their Spices. There's Spices. There's Life's an Adventure. Same trip, same place. How's that going? Okay, $1,490 to visit our national park. There you go. Thank you for listening. I hope I haven't upset you all. Okay, thank you.
Well, everyone's been very efficient this afternoon. Right? Everyone's been very efficient this afternoon. We're slightly ahead of schedule. Our next speaker is Rhonda Green. Oh, by the way, thank you, Sonia. That was a very spirited presentation. So Rhonda Green will be speaking on tourism and wildlife. Rhonda Green is an adjunct research fellow at Griffith University with her main research involving seed dispersal by frugivorous birds and effects of habitat alteration on wildlife. Lectureships have included population ecology, community ecology, conservation biology, nature tourism, wildlife tourism, and the list is very lengthy. She's clearly highly qualified to give the talk this afternoon, and we welcome Rhonda. Your clicker's on. Oops. You just have to do the left and right.
Yeah, I had it over before. Hope it works again. Yeah, thank you. Yes, actually, I'm wearing two hats. One is a research ecologist. I've got a PhD in zoology. I've been doing ecological research since the early 70s, mid-70s, somewhere around there. My other hat, I've also been running eco-tours, mostly educational wildlife tours for the last 21 years, something like that, minus the 2 COVID years. And I'm also chair of Wildlife Tourism Australia, which supports environmentally sustainable wildlife tourism. I'm also actually within the IUCN. I'm a member of the World Parks Congress, something or other, I forget exactly. Yeah, anyway, within that there's TARPA's tourism and protected areas, and within that I'm on the biodiversity working group, because we want good tourism, true ecotourism in national parks, but true ecotourism, it's nature-based, it's educational in such a way as to enhance the appreciation and understanding of fauna and flora. It is environmentally, ecologically sustainable. It contributes to the environment and it contributes to local communities. That is what ecotourism is. There's a lot of people using the word ecotourism that somehow had never realised that. Because I said I'm chair of Wildlife Tourism Australia, I'm running a webinar at the end of the month, almost at the end of this month on a Wednesday, 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. The reason for the 11 a.m. is so that Hector Ceballos Lescuren, who is the father of ecotourism, he was the one that came up with that definition. And he's rather disappointed in his own country, Mexico. It's because he's still in Mexico that we made it that time of day, so that it's not too inconvenient for him. He's disappointed that a lot of what's called ecotourism in Mexico now is just adventure tourism. It's not just Mexico. Anyway, now see if I can get this thing working. Which way around do I hold it? That way maybe? Yeah, good. Okay, where I can... Oh, have we got... Is this one that I can take out of the... So I can see what I've got on there. National parks do provide wonderful experiences, and we want people to experience our national parks. You can go in there and, thank you, sit there and meditate. This was actually my very first view of a Queensland National Park. I came up with my parents as a young teenager from Adelaide. This is one of the walking tracks at Binnaburra. I just went in there and I was just absolutely overwhelmed by it. I remember just sitting there. I remember a little rufous fantail fluttering around in front of me. Had a really soft spot for rufous fantails ever since. I spent a lot of time just sitting in the forest, absorbing the atmosphere. Nature observation, whether you're looking at variety of fungi, whether you're looking at birds, or just a bit of everything. Walking, sure. You can go for a lovely long solo walk or a short walk, depending on your fitness or interest, or guided walks. They can be used for riding or rowing or driving. Some of our big national parks like Currawinja, you've got to drive through it to get to anywhere. Camping, accommodation nearby, like the Binnaburra and O'Reilly's that Peter mentioned. It's possible for camping or accommodation within. That's what we're... It's used in all sorts of ways for personal experiences. But it's also for the protection of biodiversity. like this rather indistinct looking little bird there, the northern race of the eastern bristlebird. There's only about 50 pairs of those left, both sides of the border up around here. And yeah, there's a lot. I remember when, not our current mayor of the Scenic Rim, but our previous mayor came into power. I went up to him and introduced myself and said that we're interested, very concerned about wildlife conservation in the Scenic Rim. No conservation problems here. There's more wallabies around than I've ever seen as a boy. Biodiversity is not just wallabies. Includes a lot more. And yeah, I'm afraid there's a few people that think that way. So yeah, I'm going to talk with two hats in a way, one as a research ecologist and one as Chair of Wildlife Tourism Australia. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap there. So biodiversity conservation and the experience of wilderness, which national parks provide. So nature-based tourism can happen in national parks, obviously. It can also happen on public Crown land, like this is a beach just over the border at Fingal, with council land coming down with, I take tourists there quite often. We walk down through the Banksias and I say, this is the Gold Coast before it became the Gold Coast. You know, we're not looking at big high-rise tourism developments. We're looking at little wattle birds and sometimes legless lizards, even echidnas, and yeah, so we're having a good nature-based experience there on Crown land, but not national parks. We can also have good nature-based experiences outside, on private land. This one's on Tamborine Mountain. The horse riding is on private land. It's close to national parks. The horse riders still get the experience of these beautiful forests and things they're riding past, but without actually going in. I used to actually go horse riding in a national park when I was a teenager living in Adelaide. I'd catch the train up to Belair National Park, go galloping through, and yeah, before I started to realise the spread of weeds, the erosion, and I used to go riding at Binnaburra too. But does anyone remember the horse riding at Binnaburra from years ago? Yeah, I used to enjoy it, but then the tracks, they just got so eroded. They were just like funnels, like gutters, and very, very slippery. I also accidentally, if anyone knows Bellbird Lookout, I accidentally rode a very frisky little pony onto the edge of Bellbird Lookout, sort of doing side steps. Hey, let's go uphill, mate. So, anyway, let's have a look now. Yeah, so private enterprise, Sonia gave the definition of private development, but we can still have private enterprise. I do private enterprise in national parks. I take small groups in, looking for birds and other animals and watching the bowerbirds building their bowers and all that sort of thing. So, so private enterprise can be small groups on day trips or large groups on day trips. You see quite a lot of large groups walking around in some of the national parks. I wish some of them would be a little quieter. It can be nature-focused like ours, or it can just be, nature tourism. Not necessarily ecotourism, but nature tourism can be adventure-focused, whitewater rafting and rock climbing, that sort of thing. It can be camping or accommodation near the national parks. It can be camping or accommodation within the national parks, which is the main thing that we'll be talking about soon. And it can be other facilities like food outlets, places selling souvenirs and so on. This is O'Reilly's when it still was national park camping. Now O'Reilly's have built their big safari tents there. That one didn't worry, as an ecologist, that bit didn't worry me quite so much because this is already all cleared. It's a lawn, it's mowed grass that they took over. There's other aspects of it that may not be so great, putting up prices and so on, but as far as the ecology went, that's probably one of the least concerning. Now, yeah, they talk about Kruger National. Yeah, it works well in Kruger National Park. I've been to Kruger 3 times and loved it. And you drive from rest camp to rest camp. They've got it surrounded by fences and electric grids that the elephants and lions and leopards can't get in. And you stay in these little huts, and there's also picnic areas where you can buy lunch. That works well. But Kruger is enormous. If you look at the size of some of our national parks, now let's see, what have I got here? Yeah, Lamington National Park there, 206 square kilometres. Hinchinbrook's a bit bigger. Currawinja National Park, I consider pretty big. You know, it takes a couple of days driving through it and stopping to walk here and there to really see it properly. Kalula's pretty big. But Kruger would, you know, you could put all those up into within a quarter, and then there's all the rest. Kruger's the size of Israel. And what works in Kruger will not necessarily work in others. Yeah, a party to the Convention of Biological Diversity, Australia has committed to a target of 17% of terrestrial and inland water in the National Reserve System in a balanced way that is ecologically representative of at least 10% of each bioregion protected, well connected, well managed. That was the commitment. It's supposed to be done by 2020. Most countries have achieved. So I think this came up in 2010. Most countries have achieved the 17%. Australia has 7.5 in national parks. It also has other protected areas, but it's still a long way off. Queensland, now Queensland's our most, well, no, maybe Western Australia is a contender, but Queensland is certainly one of our most biodiverse states. It's, yeah, Queensland's wonderful, with all our from our rainforests through to our outback. So, has Queensland got 7.5% in national parks? No, we've got 5.6. It's a long way short. Okay, with other protected areas, that's up to 8 point something, but it's still a bit dismal. So, yeah, as Peter was showing, our national park areas are not that big, really. We've got a great number of national parks, but they collectively, they don't really cover enough area, and they don't represent 10% of all of our ecosystems. Long way off it. So, biodiversity conservation. It's not just wallabies, it's not just koalas, not even just greater gliders. Yeah, there's things, well, like one of the arguments put forward by Isla Quito and others for our rainforests around New South Wales and Queensland border to become World Heritage. We've got the greatest diversity of Gondwana-related land snails. There's a lot of, a lot of people aren't terribly interested in our diversity of insects, the diversity of things. Well, yeah, I'm going to show a picture of the Richmond birdwing in a minute. There's so many chains of interrelations. Now, the birdwing butterfly, Richmond birdwing, second biggest butterfly in Australia, well, the female is, male's a bit smaller, but beautiful, depends on the Parastolochia vine. That Parastolochia vine depends on a little gnat that fertilises the flowers. That little gnat depends on clear mountain streams for its larva. And that's one that we know about, and we still don't know all the details. There's a lot of insects that haven't even been properly described in the scientific literature, let alone know about their ecology. And just about everything depends on either the plants for pollination, the insectivorous birds, the lizards, the things that eat the birds and the lizards, you know, and as Roger Kitching, our former chair of ecology at Griffith Uni, said, most biodiversity is insects. But a lot of people lose sight of all these little creatures. The ecosystem the ecosystem processes, like this Wampu fruit dove I've shown here, are dispersing the seeds of bangalow palms. And it's the only one that can manage, well, possibly the top-knot pigeon as well, but the only one that I've found that is able to swallow Diploglottis campbellii fruits and disperse those. Because this is why the tree produces fruit. It doesn't produce it as nutrient for the seed, it produces it for these guys or whatever is going to eat it, digest the soft fruit and disperse the seed. And there are just so many ecological processes that can be messed up. Migration routes can be messed up if the superb fruit dove, related to this one, travels, it comes down here to breed, then it heads back to North Queensland in the winter, as do a number of other things. Yeah, if you interfere with the migration routes along the way by suddenly this patch of forest where it used to depend on getting a bit of a feed and a bit of a rest, yeah, if it's not going to be there anymore, is this really taken into account by people that decide what developments are going to happen here and there and what's going to be cleared, what's going to stay? Okay, I did a big report with Karen Higginbottom through Griffith University and through the CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre for Sustainable Tourism. I did a big report with her on the negative impacts of wildlife tourism on wildlife. And a number of people have said to me, look, why do you do that? You're talking about your own industry. You run wildlife tours. Why do you talk about the negatives? I said, well, someone running a restaurant, they need to know about food poisoning. They need to know how to avoid it, or at least how to absolutely minimise the possibility. Someone manufacturing cars, they've got to know what happens to a car in an accident so they can design their cars a bit better so the passengers have a better chance of survival. We need to know what our impacts can be on the wildlife if we're going to prevent them. So what are some of those? Well, there's direct killing. I know some, which I won't mention the names, certified, eco-certified, who kill snakes because their guests don't like to see them, even if those snakes are just inoffensive little ones curled up under a rock somewhere. So yeah, there is direct killing. And another place where they were actually killing the green tree frogs that people didn't like to see in the toilets. They stopped doing that after a while, fortunately. And another who got advanced I was very happy to get advanced eco-certification, a little bit disturbed that someone else who got advanced eco-certification soon after me wants to get rid of all the fruit bats. No, we don't need them for seed dispersal and pollination, got birds for that. He just wanted to get rid of them all. He couldn't, of course, fortunately. So yeah, there is direct, deliberate killing sometimes. There's also increased roadkill. Tawny frogmouths and owls often just get blinded by a vehicle coming towards them. Every now and then I'll find one dead on the road, or occasionally one that's actually okay and we can take it back and it can revive and we can release it again a little bit further away from the road. And when things are being cleared, to put in new cabins, to put in wider tracks, something that's become not just a little walking track, but a vehicular track. When trees are being felled, if there's something nesting in their burrows, I've been a koala spotter employed by local councils up what used to be Pine Rivers. I remember one terrible day when I'd been seeing forests being cleared. It was for a new housing development. I was emotionally prepared. Yeah, this is going to be cleared. But looking around after half an hour and thinking, that used to be a forest, now it's all... But the last day, there were 12 big trees with hollows. I asked the bulldozer driver, could you please take those down as gently as you can? He was actually quite good. He said, look, I don't want to be doing this. He tried to take the trees down, one tree against another, so it sort of came down in stages, didn't crash. Two of the trees had sugar gliders in them, which managed to glide out as the tree was falling. One had a nest of native bees. A brush-tail possum fell, she came out with a baby on her back, and the baby fell off. I managed to grab the baby, run after her, pop the baby on her back. Then another one came down, and this time the brush-tail ran up another tree nearby. And I wasn't asked to actually look at these animals at all. It was just koalas that the bylaw said, but I thought it gave me an opportunity to see what else was happening. I couldn't get the baby back on her, so I took the baby back and raised it as an orphan and had to do a nest of scaly-breasted lorikeets came down. And this is just a dozen trees. Everything else was gone. Those possums and gliders and so on that did escape, and the parents of the scaly-breasted lorikeet, one chick was dead, I took another one back home to raise. Where are they going to go? Those trees are gone. So there's casualties during clearing, and then what do they do afterwards? When those people are about to clear, do they just look, I'm asking a question because I really don't know exactly what they look at. Do they look at just, okay, we're taking 0.2% of the total area, so that shouldn't matter. Do they look at whether there are big hollow trees? Well, maybe nowadays they do. Do they look at something that flowers or fruits in the winter, which is the lean season for nectar eaters and fruit eaters, and think, hey, what are they going to eat if we take these last ones out? I don't know how much all that comes into it, and I doubt that, the hunting, fishing and collecting, we don't have a lot of hunting in national parks. Campbell Newman tried to get it in. Fishing does happen, and there is some illegal collecting. People take off with staghorns and things to grow back home, and there's certainly illegal collecting for the black market in wildlife trafficking as well. That's not an impact of tourism, that's outside of tourism. Habitat alteration, well, just mentioned you take out some of the important trees. Habitat clearing altogether. Fragmentation, animals that don't want to now... I did an ecological survey at Wivenhoe years ago, and I was quite pleased. There was a hotel they were going to plan, but actually that fell through for economic reasons. But the developer said, look, if you find that the bandicoots need to come from here to there for water or something, and that's where we're going to put our cabins, okay, we'll put the cabins somewhere else. So I thought, well, that part's good. I don't know how often that is thought of. This happens around campgrounds. People collecting firewood and generally trampling the understory, and sometimes too a little bit too much fear of what might happen in a fire, which has probably increased over what happened a couple of years ago. So-called cool burning, which gets rid of a lot of the understory that's needed by a lot of our little low-foraging birds and lizards and echidnas and antechinus and other things. So there's a lot of possible... Whoops, what happened? Thank you. Yeah, and then there's... I could go on for another hour about various things to do with feeding wildlife. There are some places where it seems to be acceptable if the right foods are used, but not in national parks, not in wilderness areas, in places where the habitat's already been disturbed anyway and you use the right foods. Maybe it's okay in some circumstances, but this lady is just feeding swans, she's feeding bread to the swans at Eagleby. And best intention, she loves the swans. She doesn't realise bread's not really great for them. You can spread disease, you can get really severe behaviour changes. I've actually twice had to, rescue, except I had to have it put down, brush-tail possums from a campground near Mount Barney. In fact, the manager called me because one woman threatened to get the RSPCA onto him. People were feeding the possums were coming so used to being fed, they were crowded, usually possums will space themselves out territorially, and but now they were so close, so packed in, they were causing each other so much stress. Yeah, I went there, usually because I do fauna surveys, I live trap, I put some wire cage traps down, I put some bait in, I go away, come back at dawn the next morning, hope I've got something in the trap. This time, I was pushing half a dozen possums out of the way to let the one I wanted go into the trap. It was almost blind, its hair was falling out, it was limping. Took it to the vet said, no, I've just got to put it down. They found its intestines were twisted and everything, and they said, this is stress caused by the overcrowding. And I had to do exactly the same a few weeks later for another one. Yeah, animals can get dangerous, like the dingoes that were being fed on Fraser Island and attacking children, and yeah, so there's all sorts of, and I remember when I first went to Binnaburra, currawongs everywhere. People were in the campground were feeding them, and that was quite pleasant. And the first time I took my son camping there, he was delighted, all these currawongs around him. Look, he was 6 months old, holding a biscuit in those tiny fingers that they were gazing at. Currawongs are not good to have there, especially over winter, not such vast numbers of them. In the spring, currawongs love eating nestlings and eggs, and if you get too many currawongs, you get a lot less of the smaller birds that they prey on. So yeah, you can upset the balance in a number of ways. Yeah, disturbing wildlife. If you just... Oh, sorry. Really? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there's always all sorts of ways that you can disturb. If you disturb them too often from their feeding grounds, their breeding grounds, their resting grounds, they might go somewhere that's less desirable for them. So, and there's a lot of literature. That's the one that I just mentioned. If you look up Wildlife Tourism Australia's website, we've got a lot of publications on there about that. Now, yeah, so questions to ask. When people are looking at developing something, where are the vulnerable species? Where are the vulnerable ecosystems? What impacts are possible on these? And are there seasonal needs of the animals? They don't always do surveys in all seasons. Has a truly comprehensive survey, fauna and flora survey, been conducted? Have they done it in enough seasons and over a couple of years to find where the ephemeral orchids are? All sorts of things. Have they remembered microbats? Oh, and it took, the Wivenhoe study I mentioned, it took us 6 months to find a dunnart. We know dunarts are there because we finally found it, but just trapping for 3 or 4 nights doesn't do it. Have the results been made public so we can say, look, did you only look for frogs on a dry winter night? You've got to go back and look for them on wet summer nights and look for them on, yeah. And how will tourist behaviour be controlled? You can't just assume that everyone that goes... I took one twitcher, absolute fanatic on photographing every bird. He was from the States, big guy, and there was a lyrebird displaying at O'Reilly's. That's something really special. How many people have seen a lyrebird displaying? Yeah. So he's watching it, so a dozen other people. He suddenly walked straight up to it to flush it, to take a photo. Okay, he got his photo. It's not good for a bird, not good for the other people that wanted to watch it, or the people later that wanted to watch it if that lyrebird decided never to display there again. And he says, I've only got 3 days to see all the birds in Australia. I felt like saying, who cares? So anyway, yeah, this is I happened to sit next to Campbell Newman, or rather he came and sat next to me, it wasn't my choice, at an ecotourism conference, or a tourism conference. This was the eco thing, and I put my hand up to say to everyone, him included, this thing about before you put any new facilities, new accommodation into a national park, you need research to find where the vulnerable species and ecosystems are. His response, don't need any research, you just do these things and then see if it's sustainable. Well, if kangaroos and emus are disappearing, we might notice. If it's a rare little frog, we won't, but he wouldn't care about that, of course. And then he invited us as tour operators to Parliament House, saying, we're going to be the eco-tourism capital. And his tourism minister, Jan Stuckey, was saying the same thing. And then he said, oh, we know we're doing the right thing. We know we're on the right track, so the Greenies are against us. He waited for applause. Fortunately, it didn't come. I went up to Jan Stuckey and said, look, as Chair of Wildlife Tourism Australia, I'd like to come and talk to you about sustainability in tourism. And so would our secretary. He said, oh, no, I'm only tourism. Sustainability is for the Environment Minister. I said, look, I'm talking about sustainability in tourism. We want tourism. We want tourism in national parks, but we want it to be sustainable. And she still said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm only allowed to talk about tourism policy. I sent her an email later asking, when did sustainability drop out of the definition of ecotourism? And I ended up writing about all that in a international paper. Oh, there's the Richmond butterfly I talked about. And I won't get a chance to go into now how, yeah, these are all, that's near Bunya Mountains National Park. That's on the edge of Border Ranges National Park. You don't have to be in a national park. The only place I can think of where I'd like to see accommodation in a Queensland National Park is in the middle of Currawinya, but that's where there's already a large cleared area, a wool shed, toilets, and yeah, it would make sense to have a hostel or something. They're not $1,000 a night job. But I can't think of anywhere else in Queensland I'd want to see it in a national park. Oh, that was those wonderful cabins at Binnaburra that we don't have anymore. I still can't believe we don't have them. So, okay. Yeah, handle with care. So I was going to go into wilderness experience, but I don't think I have time. But except just to say, I think some of these developments are going to spoil the wilderness experience. Yeah, we don't have to have access to absolutely everything. Access to the top of Mount French by road is great. We don't want it on top of every mountain. Okay, thanks.
I want to talk to you afterwards. Thank you, Rhonda. Clearly, she's got so much experience, she could have gone on for a number of hours, but we unfortunately have to be out of here at a certain time. We have to follow the timetable. Now, on the agenda, we have something called Wild
Yoga.
Animal Australian Yoga, which apparently Lois is going to lead, and I'll be very interested to see how she goes about this.
So this is a little bit of a joke, just to give you a bit of respite before we hear from our final speaker. Poor old Dan Broome had a really unfortunate experience where he got to Melbourne from Tasmania and they went and cancelled the flight on him. So, but anyway, he's here and he's arrived. But if you'd like to all stand up and do a little bit of Australian animal yoga, I'm no expert at this. It'll only take a couple of minutes. So first of all, I'd like you to be a koala. So you have to stand on one foot and raise your arm. As you can see, I'm not that good at this. Now you can be an emu. And now you can be, oh, that might be a little difficult. Maybe we won't do that one.
We haven't got the first aid kit.
And now you can be a kangaroo. And stand up. Very good. And now you can be a stork. Very good. There are other ones you can do lying on the ground, but I thought that might be a bit difficult. So I hope that's energised you, and now you can sit down and listen to our last speaker. And don't forget to think about your questions, because your questions you can type into your phone, and we'll show you how to do that, and they'll come up on the screen. Okay? Thank you.
Those questions are being quantified as data pro or for or against, and it's giving community consult. So they're actually being, your answers in that Mentimeter questionnaire are actually being quantified.
Can you do it after today?
Of course you can.
Yeah, there are a few people who won't have used their phones for questions, and We'll get through the ones on the screen first, and then you can start waving your arms and we'll get to your questions. So we're delighted to hear Daniel Brown was able to get here from Melbourne despite all the complications. He's speaking on the integrity of national parks, with a case study of Lake Malbina in Tasmania. Dan Brown is a bushwalker, photographer, filmmaker, and conservationist from Tasmania. He's an advisor to the Tasmanian Greens and is the campaign manager for the group Fishers and Walkers Tasmania, who fight against inappropriate development in national parks, most notably against helicopter tourism at Lake Malbina and the construction of luxury lodges along the South Coast Track. So, Dan, you're up. Do you have slides? Here's the clicker, you just go back and forth.
Hello.
Want me to sort of give you a 10-minute warning?
Yeah, just drag me off when I'm talking too much. Hi, my name's Dan Brown. I've got some notes and I'll probably forget to look at them, so I'll put them in my back pocket. As Lois mentioned, I've been through 4 states today trying to get here. I left my home in the Huon Valley at 4:30 this morning. If I collapse at some point, just drag me off somewhere comfortable and let me be, okay? So I want to talk about wilderness culture and why it's important. And I want to talk about how that informed the campaign work that I do in Tasmania. And I want to take you through some of our tactics and the successes we've had and the failures we had and the things we've learnt along the way. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an academic, I am, I guess, an activist, a bit of a troublemaker, so we'll finish the day with a bit of rabble-rousing. So I was described as a this and a that and a photographer and a filmmaker and all those things, but most of all I'm a bushwalker. I learnt and developed a great love of country by walking through the mountains of Tasmania. I've traversed that island, left, right, centre. I've done the whole thing so many times, it's just absolutely feeds my soul. And when we talk about connection to country, that seems like hollow words sometimes, but it's okay for white folk to do it too. And the way we do it is by getting out there amongst it and paying attention to the big things and the little things and the forces that create it, and, you know, the ancient Gondwanan aspects to a landscape, the glaciated landscapes, all of the things. If we pay attention to it and if we share our adventures with our friends, then we've got something we can hold on to and we can talk about, and it can motivate us to do some good things. I will refer to the notes. So that wild culture, some people refer to as a re-indigenisation, because I am a white fella. I've not connected to this country or Tasmania or to Western Australia where I grew up, but it's through this process of immersing myself in landscape where I develop a connection, and some are calling this re-indigenisation, and for me that's the key to motivating myself to protect a place. Sonia mentioned you have to see a place to want to protect it. This is one of Bob Brown's old truisms, and it is truth. But when that seeing a place is a 2-minute Instagram photo, you're not really doing that. You have to spend time and you have to understand a landscape. What happened there? Oop. There we go. Tasmania's got all sorts of landscapes, beautiful old trees, rainforest, just under the mountaintops, all of those things. I cut my teeth in activism using the skills I have as a filmmaker and a photographer. When you're going to be active to a cause, you may as well be useful. There's kind of no point just being a third wheel. So if you're going to volunteer, identify your skills and your strengths and volunteer them. And look, it can be a bit frustrating because that might be your day job, but it's the most useful thing to a campaign quite often. So I've photographed hundreds of rallies and all this sort of thing. And when you get involved in a campaign, it's like, yeah, I love this thing. It's super easy. I can do it. But it's actually not. It's quite hard when you don't do this to me. This is as slow as my trip to Queensland. Oh, God. Oh, there we go. It is hard. Okay, so let's talk about Lake Malbina. This is why I'm here. This is Lake Malbina, and up the top there is Halls Island. Now, quite often you'll hear this case referred to in all sorts of ways. Tasmanians refer to the same place with many, many different names. So Halls Island is in Lake Malbina, which is on the Central Plateau, part of the Western Lakes, which is inside the walls of Jerusalem National Park, which forms part of the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. So you will hear all of these references throughout this presentation, but also when people talk about our campaign, you will hear lots of names. So what happened is a helicopter tourism proposal was proposed to fly fishermen into that island up the back. And it was all done in secret. We had no idea what they were doing. I'm going to wait. When they proposed this particular...
Try the clicker again.
I'll click back. Okay. So Lake Malbina is a very beautiful and peaceful place. It sits about 900 metres above sea level. It's what they call a fire refugia island. It sits inside an area that has been smashed by wildfires over decades and generations. But on Halls Island, there are species that have never been burned. So there is rainforest. This is actually on the island. Inside this rainforest are myrtles, kingbilly pines, pencil pines, some of them up to 1,000 years old. Never seen a fire. They want to put a helicopter tourism operation on this 10-hectare island. They look like the outdoors type, don't they? Okay, so these are the guys that cooked up the scheme. So the idea was, let's unlock the parks to tourism. Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area has been protected from development for a very long time because of the efforts of people like Bob Brown, Christine Milne, and generations of activists. The global green movement was born in Tasmania, and we're fiercely proud of that. These blokes aren't. So there's a premier, there's a senator, there's a buffhead, and there's a couple of other buffheads. Does anyone recognise that bloke? Jason Jacoby. He used to be head of the Queensland Parks Service, and they helicoptered him into Tasmania to oversee the expressions of interest process for the Unlock the Parks policy. You can have him back. And it's my job to send him back. This bloke has done it here. So the Unlock the Parks policy for Halls Island proposal was all done in secret. They rezoned a wilderness area to make it what's called self-reliant recreational zone. A weird term because that means you can bring a helicopter in even though it's called self-reliant recreation. Who would have guessed it? They secretly changed a licence over a tiny little hut, historic hut on Halls Island, into an exclusive possession lease. Now, that's like that Spices place. I'm no longer allowed to go to Halls Island because they secretly expanded the lease over this 40 square metre hut site to a 10-hectare island. So if you or me or anyone wants to go to this place inside the World Heritage Area, we have to write to the proponent and ask his permission. We've done that, he doesn't let us go there. Also, that's all right. There's a process called a reserve activity assessment that was created to judge how this proposal would work. And Rhonda mentioned all of the different things that would need to be done for any sort of proposal to go ahead. When you read the RAA that was put forward for Halls Island, you realise they did none of those things. And then, so lo and behold, a development application permit turned up nailed to a tree on Halls Island. That's pretty crazy. Oop. Okay, so there are really good people in the Park Service, And if there's anyone in the Park Service in this, anyone? Okay, you don't have to put your hand up, I know it's a bit difficult. But what they did is they knew this proposal stunk. And they had access to some of the documentation that none of us did. And so one day, the reserve activity assessment that was being kept secret turned up on a Greens minister's front doorstep. And that started giving us clues as to what was going on. One thing that was going on is we found out that 5,000 hectares of wilderness would be degraded from this one tourism operation because of the flight paths of the helicopters, because of the landing zone of the helicopters, the development itself. 5,000 hectares of wilderness, pure wilderness, would be degraded for the sake of 2.5 jobs. Absolutely crazy. That's Lake Sappho, by the way, a magnificent place. So what did we do? We started organising and we interrogated the management plans. We looked at what the faults were with the RAA. We started studying things and we kept finding all these different holes in, I'm going to have to do this, aren't I? In the way they were operating. We did ASIC searches on the people who were investing in the company that were backing this developer. So we found out who they were and we publicly named them and shamed them. More outdoor types. We did all those other things that I'm sure you all do as well. We wrote our letters, we requested meetings with ministers, we did all those things and we put in right to information requests and we did it incessantly. So every bit of information in that RAA we scrutinised and then we sent in right to information requests. Quite often you wouldn't get much back. So that's typical of what we'd get back on the left there. That's actually a Christmas card we sent to Jason Jacoby. So one thing we did with our campaigning is we made it fun. We took a bit of delight in sticking it up these people because they really deserved it. And they were taking the mickey out of us, so why not? And all of the time, all of these bits of information we were feeding into our social media constantly, every day. And it really annoyed them. So that's the key. Research, constant reading, scrutinising all of the various aspects of the plans and make sure that you're smarter than them, you can see them, you know what they're doing. I saw someone with a Keep Tassie Wild sticker on his water bottle. Great little company. They assisted us by doing some animations and things like that. They've got a great following on their social media. So they gave us a kick along. We talked to all those people just to form a bit of a community. And that community would meet at a pub every Monday night. And sometimes there would be 4 of us, sometimes there'd be 3 of us, sometimes there'd be 12 of us. But we met every single Monday night to plot and plan what we were going to do to take these buggers down. Because this proposal had the support of 2 consecutive premiers, now 3 attorneys general, the head of the Parks Department, the Coordinator General, all of these bigwigs getting paid 500, 600 grand a year, and here's us volunteers. So we'd have a beer and we'd discuss what we're going to do every Monday. It was really, really important. Regular meetings. There's some of those legends that did that. And we got busy, we made our banners and we got in their face everywhere. So on Parliament lawns, we'd go to tourism conferences, we'd hang our banners off bridges. We got really visible. We made sure that everybody knew that Malbina mattered. We had forums, City Hall forums. We discussed all of these issues at a scientific level, at a really forensic dismembering of what was a pretty half-assed method of putting things together. We also took it on the road, so we took our community meetings around Tasmania. We made sure that the people who loved that area, and I didn't explain it properly, but Malbina is a very important place for bushwalkers, but it's an even more important place for anglers, fly fishers. Now, this is a cohort of people who don't normally get active. Bushwalkers are generally pretty conservative, fishermen even more so. So to get them angry and motivated, we needed to talk directly to them. So we went to meetings like this in their towns and we discussed all of this stuff, and they really don't like it when governments are taking the mickey out of them, but they are quite happy to come to a meeting like this where they can eyeball you in person. And they also loved our social media because we spoke in their language. We also formed an alliance with different groups, and this was really important in fighting this campaign. The Environmental Defenders Office, along with the TNPA, the National Parks Association, they did the legal stuff. The Wilderness Society helped fundraise for that legal stuff. The Greens, we briefed them regularly, and they would stand up in Parliament and they would ask questions of the government. They would do adjournment speeches talking of the beauty and the quiet nature that was about to be destroyed. The Tasmanian Wilderness Guides Association were an impressive group of young people who were guides who would potentially benefit the most out of these things, but they knew it was wrong, and so they drew a line in the sand and they made sure that they stood side by side with us and helped us keep Tassie Wild, helped on the social media stuff. But it is a real balancing act. Like I said, anglers and bushwalkers aren't your traditional greenies, so we had to keep the Greens sort of in the background, had to keep the Wilderness Society in the background a bit, because that grated upon that community. So it was a real balancing act, keeping people motivated and active, and we slipped up from time to time because we got a bit too green. But also with our friends interstate, we did acknowledge and we did talk to other groups interstate about their problems, and we exchanged ideas, but we didn't do too much overtly because we didn't want to appear as a big green movement. And I know that hurts green people to hear. I'm a green person, but our brand doesn't work with some people, and I'm results driven, so it was all about getting the result we needed. That's my dog, that's Leroy. So market stalls, all sorts of things. Blank screens. We also did uncomfortable things. Things where the police got involved, and of course this is an opt-in thing. And thank you anyone who got rid of Morrison, thank you. So what this sort of stuff did was attract the attention of the media, and they were starting to notice us. They were seeing us everywhere. We were being pretty annoying, but we were also being smart, and they got it. But we did other things, like we took PA gear, and we played helicopter sound effects at full bore as ministers arrived to their conference. We got right in their face. Now, that's not a comfortable thing for a Conservative person to do. It's not a comfortable thing for a ratbag to do, but it was pretty effective and it got some attention. Anyway, we don't have sound, but the ministers weren't very happy about it all. We got in their faces. Cherie, she's a research scientist. She's just a dead set legend and a bushwalker. She shirt fronts a premier. We made the world's biggest banner. We didn't really. We engaged a graphic designer to do that. But the point is, Malbina matters, and everyone started to recognise it. Now, media is a bit of a scary thing for a lot of community groups to get involved with. I've worked in the media, and there's a few things that you've got to do and accept in that journey. So, you've got to do their research for them. They only have so much capacity and so much capability, let's put it that way. In your town, you've got to identify who's receptive and on what platform. Collect content for them and identify potential talent within your movement that can speak clearly and concisely about the matters. Diverse talent, males, females. Brief them thoroughly. You've got to hold their hand, all right? So journalists also like their exclusives. You've got to give them that and honour that. You've got to respect their impartiality. Never give false, exaggerated information, because that's the job of the ones you're trying to beat. Always be upfront with them and they will respect that. And it pays off in the long term. And it can be frustrating because sometimes you'll put all this effort into getting a story up and it'll be just a bit average and you just go again. That's all right. All publicity is good publicity, and we got heaps of publicity from Malbina. Hundreds of newspaper articles, magazine articles, all sorts of stuff happened, and we just... Come on. We got lots of stuff going. This is one of our best headlines in a national broadsheet. That photograph went with that headline. $4,000 a year the proponent pays for that island. I reckon if I put a dish around, we could get $4,000 a year to get it off him. I think we could. That's also the same price as a garbage tip outside of Launceston. Now, that was great on the day and it gave us a bit of a thrill, but we get to reuse that and reuse that and reuse that on social media and remind people that that's how much they value their national parks. Nostalgia is also really important, a really important tool in campaigning. Speak to people's hearts and their collective memory. That's the little hut that I spoke about on Hall's Island. Hall's Hut it's called. Reg Hall built it. Reg Hall's son wrote this article, so we engaged with him and he's got on board the campaign, and he spoke in a nostalgic way that so many people of the Western Lakes or Lake Malbina know of, and it really gets them there, and that gets people motivated too. People like Gerard, he sends in photos of his trip in 1986. Later on, I walked into Lake Malbina with Gerard and his adult sons. You know, this is heartland stuff and it works really well. And so we were getting lots of attention. Media, now the cartoonists got on board. John Kudelka, anyone like Kudelka's cartoons? I love them. Anyway, he's been a great friend of our cause. More grist for the social media mill. And it creates momentum. People write in letters, media generates more media, which generates social media, which generates public engagement, which makes the media want to do more media. You just got to get that ball rolling and keep it going. And it's difficult, but all of a sudden Malbina came a code word for government secrecy in Tasmania. Everyone knew Malbina meant dodgy. Ha! Which meant there was pressure on that bloke. The leaks kept coming from parks, there was disquiet at a political level, media inquiries kept coming, activists were in their face all the time, awkward questions via email and RTIs going in, business was getting edgy because none of their expressions of interest were getting accepted, none of them were. Everyone was unhappy. UNESCO was unhappy, so big pressure on him. He's now being investigated for bullying within his own department. As I said, you can have him back. All for a development with 2.5 employees that has some crappy little hut on an island. And it's important also to just keep talking about why you love the place. And I'm talking about the social media angle on this. Just keep it coming. When you got nothing else, throw up a pretty picture. I'm a photographer, I know about this. Tell stories about your adventures, about the great untracked wild lands out there and how helicopters buzzing through them isn't going to make them any better. It's exquisite country. And keep visiting Malbina. Just keep going there, despite the fact you're not allowed to go there. And we'd keep posting pictures like that of some bloke, faceless person on our island. So we knew we had momentum and we decided to create an event. And I'm a firm believer that there's nothing more powerful than going back to the country that is the important place. Okay, cool, I reckon I'll get there. So we had this event called Reclaim Malbina. We got 150 people up to the edge of the World Heritage Area. And just as a bit of background, it takes a full day to walk into Malbina over pretty rough country. There's no real formed tracks, it's a route. And everyone that turned up, it was 5 degrees that morning, sideways rain, sunshine, sideways rain. It's in the Central Highlands of Tassie. Greg French, legendary fly fisher, spoke. These are our people. They turn up in camo, carrying their fly rods. And they bonded. And absolutely unified to keep the Western Lakes wild and public. And if you look at their faces, they're not your normal greenie, are they? They're in high vis, they're in camo, bushwalkers. We had every bushwalking club come from across Tasmania. They all signed an open letter that we then sent on to the government. Now, Parks didn't want us to do this, and they threatened to, I forget the terminology, but to recommend that our action be considered under the EPBC Act as a controlled action. The development wasn't at the time considered. So we beat that by saying, well, there's only 8 of us going to walk in. We call ourselves the Malbina 8. The rest of them, don't know. They come to the rally at the edge. It's up to them. They're free people. So in groups of 8, we paddled in, we walked in. There's lots of different ways across the plateau. And we showed people the ancient pine trees. That's a easy 1,000-year-old pine tree. And the Malbina 8 reclaimed the lake. And we reclaimed the island. We then sent our letter to the head of Parks, to the Premier, and we said, this is our island. You want to take it off us? You're going to have to fine us. You're going to have to enforce your silly law. We still haven't had a reply. But we got more media, national ABC piece, other stuff, but we made our own media too. And we took photographers and filmmakers so that we could generate our own stuff going forward. These are videos and they probably don't play, so that's okay because we don't have audio. But essentially what we did is we made all our own videos, which we then rolled out across social media as well. We interviewed everyone on site, got their opinions, and cut them up into multiple videos. Some of them are quite humorous. Some of them are quite beautiful, and some of them are quite funny. But we won't look at them just yet because we can't. So we reclaimed Malbina, and it was a hugely successful event, and we still use the media, as in the content that we created, for our social media to this day. Our local Greens MP got up in Parliament and stated how we'd reclaimed the place and challenged the Premier. He had no response. And we kept watching them, and we kept going to the lake and seeing what was going on out there. This boat is something the proponent helicoptered in there. He never did the biosecurity around it or anything like that, but anyway, it ended up getting scuttled in a storm and polluting the lake with polystyrene. We made sure that we found out about it and we reported it, and he had to go and clean up his mess. And that's no easy matter when in the middle of the World Heritage Area. It's cost him lots of money. So the media kept going and the media kept going, and we had multiple court actions until we finally ended up at the Supreme Court of Tasmania in front of the full bench of the Supreme Court, where they ruled that the various aspects of the RAA were unenforceable, and the document itself was not a document that should be considered a legal document. So the developer then withdrew his DA, and he is back at square one. He still has the lease on the island though, but we're going to get that back. So these guys are Environmental Defenders Office, the Wilderness Society, Nick Sawyer from the TNPA, and a couple of citizens who are part of our group who formed part of the court action. So what's next for Tassie? The Queensland connection again. Experience Company want to put 6 luxury huts along the South Coast Track. Possibly, has anyone walked the South Coast Track? Woo! I was there in October. It's wild, rugged, beautiful, 85 kilometres of Aboriginal heartland country, bushwalkers, heritage country, and they're not going to get away with it. They're not going to do it. We're going to dismantle them and send them back to the Gold Coast, which is where their head office is. So that's our next fight, and we'll be there for it. But we'll need your help from Interstate if you can. Come down to Tassie, and just a pretty picture to finish with. That's what protecting wild culture is about. I'm excited I beat the bell.
Oh, your notes, Dad? Oh, you didn't need them, you know your stuff. Well, that was truly inspirational. Nothing like a bit of activism to get your blood stirring. So I'm going to jump in with my own question. I have a spare room in my house. If they bring up the cableway again at Springbrook, we want you to come onto the Gold Coast. Okay, so we're very good time. We've got extra time for questions, Q&A now. So if you put your questions in, I think our IT guru is going to have them up on the screen. If our speakers could sit on the front chairs. You can use this microphone. Pass it back and forth. Oh, you've got one. We need two?
Yeah, there's another one over there. 2 there. There's 3.
So don't forget the mezzanine and the code is on your program. If you want to type in your question.
Okay, you want to sit there? Oh, okay. Okay. Right, so our first question is, what reasons does government give for failing to fully restore the cardinal principle? I think that would be Peter. So we've asked for it to be restored. They said they would restore it, and they haven't done so. So what are the reasons that government gives for not acting?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
The question was, what reasons does government give for failing to fully restore the cardinal principle?
Failing to...
Fully restore the cardinal principle.
The cardinal principle.
In other words, why haven't they done it? We've asked them to, and they haven't acted.
So what reason does the government give for not restoring the cardinal principle? They don't give a reason. They just simply advertised that they had done what they promised to do and expected everyone to believe it. It was an outright lie, unfortunately. And I will be pushing this issue next Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, because we have the Environment Roundtable with the Environment Minister, and I will be presenting the case for asking them to come back and actually honour their promise to restore the cardinal principle to the status it had previously when the Nature Conservation Act came in force in 1992, and in fact it was first put into the Forestry Act in 1959. The Newman government actually didn't have, I think, felt that it would go too far if it actually wiped out the cardinal principle. So what it did was surreptitiously override it. And a lot of people are not aware of what has been undermined and what they can actually do legally now, which legally they couldn't have done previously. But there has been no answer other than they want to put resorts in parks. Tourism is telling the Environment Department what to do. I actually had a meeting with staff from the Environment Department involved in this exercise, and the comment to me was, we wait until tourism tells us what to do, and then we do it.
Thank you, Peter. Our next question is, are the mountain bike trails being developed in the Bunya Mountains in a national park? I'm not sure.
Are the mountain bike trails being developed in Bunya
So
Mountains?
is there a national park where these mountain bike trails being developed? It just says the Bunya Mountains in the national park.
I'm not aware that mountain bike trails have been developed in Bunya Mountains National Park. I am aware that they've been developed in Whitsunday, on the mainland, not Whitsunday National Park, but can't think of the name of the park at the moment, on the mainland adjacent to the Whitsunday Islands. And of course in Nerang National Park, right outside where we are here, mountain bike trails are rife. But I might point out that the reason this has happened is that when the government entered into the South East Queensland Forest Agreement, which actually was designed to transfer state forest areas across to protected areas. And the idea was, or the intention was, that when they came across to protected area, they came across to an appropriate category of protected areas. Now it's interesting, in this particular instance, conservation lobbying actually changed the circumstances and got an agreement from Beattie, the Premier, that everything would come across from state forest to national park. And that was counterproductive, because what happened was that everything that came across in state forest, you had horse riding, trail bike riding, motorbike riding, you name it, any activity you wanted, honeybees, the beehives, and they all came across suddenly to national park. And as a result, a lot of those things legally shouldn't be allowed to continue. So they simply changed the legislation basically to allow all the things that were not allowed on national parks suddenly to give them a capacity to be allowed. And when that transfer occurred, some areas should have come across as conservation parks, where horse riding can still continue, beekeeping can still continue, and others came across as national park. And that didn't happen, and it was counterproductive, because the recreation groups claimed overnight they were disenfranchised, and in fact they were.
Thank you, Peter. The next question is for Sonia. What strategies and actions do you recommend to bring tourism development under control in Queensland national parks?
Okay, so thank you for your question. I've worked extensively in tourism since I was young, and I was part of the ecotourism movement, and I think it has the best intentions in its original state, which is adjacent to the national parks, visiting the national parks, utilising historical buildings. So if they've been there for 100 years, you've got a little shack, absolutely utilise it. Utilise it for public, not for one private operator. As long as it remains public, all tour operators have the opportunity to utilise that resource for their own commercial tourism. If you give it to one, they will take all the numbers, and whatever little slot is left on the side, they can give to or allocate to either the highest bidder, or they can give to the one that they prefer. That doesn't work for us. Our parks are for everyone. Everyone should have the ability to be competitive in tourism. Utilising Ecotourism Australia, or an external accreditation organisation, as a regulatory body, I don't see the benefit to that. I see that it can assist and it plays a really good role in it, but I think the government still has to regulate its own tourism activities and the impacts, in addition to external regulators. So for me, adjacent tourism wins. And I think communities, regional communities, win.
Thank you, Sonia. Here's a curly one. Are gravity and endurance mountain bike trails appropriate for our SEQ national parks? I don't know who wants to answer that one. Maybe the audience would like to answer that one. Hands up who thinks endurance and gravity mountain bike trails are appropriate in SEQ Queensland parks. I don't see any yeses. They're there to enjoy nature. I'll move on to the next question, again for Sonia. Are there other international examples of development being limited within national parks that you know of?
Thank you again. Yes, there are many, many examples of tourism in national parks on a global scale. Africa, for example, they've been doing that for many years, and a lot of them for conservation, a lot of them with private game, hunting, safaris, staying in lodges. Many of them are very successful. They have found that a lot of the properties which in the national park are not as successful as the ones which are adjacent on private land, because when you're putting something on private land, you have your animals there, and you can guarantee wilderness sightings and things like that. If it's inside a larger area, you're still going to see it. The guides work harder to locate the animals, but you're leaving it a little bit to chance. So a lot of the lodges in Africa, for instance, they are within that situation. In America, every state has its own different law. In America, however, the American government tried to privatise campgrounds on a federal scale. They got together a committee. Unfortunately, the American public decided this was not acceptable. It lasted for 2 months, and the committee was shut down. Within places like Galapagos, they have extensive history of tourism for conservation, generally by an NGO, way to generate revenue. You've got to remember different paradigm again, poverty conservation, poverty alleviation, and tourism dependency, where it's the only thing really that you're able to get involved in. And Galapagos actually turned around and said, no more. We would, if you want to do conservation, come and do conservation. And that was this year. We've got a lot of models. China, as I said earlier, they literally pick people up and went, out you go, stay on the outside of the park, we'll do the commercial tourism in. They have a magnificent model where they actually truck in toilets every day and they truck them back out at night. So they have a very different, it's not all parks, you have to remember that. China's a large place and we have different models, but we do have good examples throughout the world, and we also have some very successful. And during COVID, these places suffered because they didn't get the finances that they needed to conserve wildlife. But within a developed, first world, educated country with a legal system that's solid, political system that's solid, I certainly would be supportive of the adjacent when I look at all the other types that they have around the world. Sorry, would you like to say something?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Yes.
I mean, when you're dealing with tourism inside national parks, it's difficult to make any sort of global pronouncement because different circumstances occur in different countries or different continents. In the case of Africa, for instance, it is appropriate to have some development inside the parks. The parks are immensely large, as was pointed out, but also you don't go walking in African parks because if you do, you get eaten. And that's rather annoying for park services to have their clients eaten. So consequently, what happens in an African park, you can't carry across to the circumstances in Australia, where there are precious few things to eat you other than the odd dingo that might nip you from time to time. By and large, it's a safe country to do these things. Our parks are also much smaller for that reason. I mean, the African parks are large because elephants need a fair bit of land in which to operate, and you also have wildebeest and a variety of other migratory species that move hundreds of kilometres, even across boundaries from in Masai National Park across into Kenya and Tanzania, and then back again every year. So the circumstances are not the same, and unfortunately, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which actually sets a lot of standards globally for what happens in protected areas, and I'm a member of the World Commission on National Parks in that organisation, but it tried to put out a paper regarding tourism in national parks and tries to generalise across all countries, as is what can happen, and falls into the trap then of having to seemingly agree with certain things that happen in Africa because they can't say they shouldn't happen because they must happen, and then apply them to countries where they don't need to happen and shouldn't happen. So just be aware that you can't make global statements about what can and can't happen unless you take the prevailing circumstances into account. I'll make one other comment there in relation to that. Tasmania, New Zealand, has huts inside national parks for survival purposes. Because in those places you can get caught in snowstorms and blizzards and God knows what else, and you die, or you may die, but you're affected by it, so you have some safe haven. In Queensland, you just don't die from exposure, unless you're a damn idiot. You can always hide from it somewhere. It's not a problem. So again, the circumstances dictate certain things. But these aren't privately owned huts, by the way. They're run by the Park Service appropriately for survival purposes.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just... Sorry, I've got to pick a bone with you on that one.
Oh, go ahead.
If you die in a Tasmanian National Park of exposure, it's not because there wasn't a hut there, it's because you're a bloody idiot. So just a quick correction.
The two deaths where they went multi-hiking and they didn't have the gear.
Well, that's right. And look, the pursuit of hiking means it's something you learn over time. And you need to understand your landscape and you need to understand what you're doing. It's a serious undertaking. So when you start putting infrastructure in parks, people start thinking, oh, I can just hike between huts. I just need my shopping bag and my thongs. I'll be right. It's a sunny day. And people are dying doing that. And that's because the Parks and Wildlife Service aren't educating people properly about the dangers. And we did have a death up at Cradle Mountain from that. They died within a couple of kilometres of a hut. So you can die very quickly in Tasmania if you don't know what you're doing. So I understand absolutely what you meant, but and there are various huts that are safe havens, particularly these old historic huts in the high country. But yeah, let's not have too many huts, please.
Stay standing, Dan. I've got a tricky question, which I will paraphrase. You might not know that we have a new CEO at the Gold Coast City Council. That's Mr. Tim Baker. Should we avoid mention of Lake Balbina in our early dealings with him?
Yeah, okay. So Tim Baker used to be Jason Jacoby's boss in Tasmania.
Oh, okay. We'll leave it there.
I would definitely mention Lake Malbina to him if you want to bring up examples of inappropriate development and community outrage and the perils of ignoring it. So with Malbina, for example, there was a public consultation period of not long, but we got 1,300 submissions saying no. There were 3 submissions for, and they chose to ignore that The writing was on the wall really early on in that, and they chose to absolutely ignore it. And it was people like Tim Baker who would not heed the warnings. And absolutely remind him of Tasmania regularly.
Well, we have already highlighted the importance of public consultation. I'm not sure how many more questions we should have. A couple more, okay. Someone has asked, what is the minimum size for a national park? Is there any criteria for the size? There you go, you're up.
There is no minimum size because it depends on what you're actually protecting. And in many cases, what's left to protect may only occur in small pockets. Consequently, those small pockets are valuable. I'll give you a prime example, is the patch of rainforest in the middle of the Gold Coast at Burleigh Heads. Tiny little national park, but an extremely important one because it's the last bit of that rainforest right on the ocean front, on the seaside. So parks will vary in size. I mean, we have island national parks that are potentially very small, but in fact extremely important for seabird nesting and a variety of other things as well. So there isn't a minimum size, but I will say that the larger the park, the better. There is no doubt about that. But I would never suggest ignoring a small area if it's important, if it's representative of something that's disappearing, or it has species in it that are endangered, then by all means protect it and give it the status of national park.
Yeah, and as Peter said, it depends on what you are trying to protect, and some animals do need a very wide-ranging area, and some, like Rattus lutereolus, the swamp rat, needs swampy areas and it needs bushland areas. It breeds in one and feeds in the other, in the rest of the... And sometimes when you've got a big habitat fragment, if you halve that, you do more than halve it for the forest interior animals, because around the edge there'll be things like noisy miners that like the combination of short grass and eucalypt trees, and they're very aggressive towards other species. They're a native species, they belong here, but we've created too much edge habitat for them. So if you have a big area and then you halve that, there'll be more noisy miners around the whole thing, and then you've more than halved the forest interior for the grey thrushes and the yellow robins and all the other things that can't make it to the edge. And you could have halved it for something like the white-throated tree creeper that just needs a larger territory to be able to find enough resources. And someone mentioned the forest agreements earlier. Yeah, that some of these processes where they say, "Oh, we've consulted the experts." Well, yeah, I was brought into the RFA, the regional forest agreements, I think, about 20 years or more ago. I was brought in as an expert on frugivorous birds. But, okay, I was pretty well an expert on southeast Queensland frugivorous birds as to what they eat, what they're able to swallow, and which ones stay in the canopy and which one, so I was asked, what's their breeding range? So I didn't know, I'd never studied that. But because I was the expert on frugivorous birds, I was supposed to answer that and then say whether I was 20% certain, 40% certain, 80%. How can you answer that? And I mentioned at one point that the Wampu fruit dove, which is an obligate frugivore, meaning it absolutely depends on fruit throughout the year, but I mentioned that in the nesting season, they sometimes eat a few insects to give their chicks a bit more protein. Oh, well, that's a generalist then, and they started to change its state. No, I said, forget I said that. It just eats a few insects, gives a few insects to its nestlings. It still absolutely depends on fruit. It's not a generalist, but she was going to put it down as a generalist. And you know the fig parrot that's been diminishing, I hope we've still got a few left, Coxon's fig parrot. Someone mentioned that it had been seen in a place that it hadn't been seen before. Oh, okay, so its range is expanding. It's not a conservation problem. I said, look, any process that says the Coxon's fig parrot is not in danger is, well, pretty well useless. And whoever was looking at the platypus forgot to tick the little box that said that whether it's genetically unique. So in their final report, the platypus did not go down as a genetically unique line. So yeah, some of these reports that say, oh well, we've consulted expert panels and this is the result. Yeah, I'm a bit wary of them.
Thank you, Rhonda. Here's a question for Justine. Has Council consulted with the Kombumerri people about the proposal for a cableway to Springbok?
What's that?
No, they haven't consulted us, not as far as I'm aware. Like I mentioned in my talk, a lot of our Indigenous consultation is tied to government legislation where they have to go to the native title body and the culture heritage body. Naringwal, my family group, we represent 5 of the 6 local Kombumerri lines. We're not part of the native title body. They recently removed my brother, a Kombumerri applicant, from the native title body so that we don't have a local Gold Coast spokesperson in the regional native title. The regional native title expands over the Gold Coast, Bow Desert, parts of Logan, and so we've got people that grew up in Logan and Bow Desert making decisions for our Gold Coast area. They recently made decisions about development at the Spit and in Nerang State Forest that doesn't align with our Kombumerri values. So we're missing out on our consultation and our say-so and our local government because they're tied to that native title legislation locking us out. So we've got people claiming they're traditional owners of this whole region. That's impossible. You can't be a blackfella from everywhere like that. Like, I know my clan and tribe, and I ain't claiming like out freshwater country, but we've got freshwater people coming here talking on saltwater country and taking away my family's value. I have elders that tell me about the changes on country when they were little to when they went into country and returned to their dreaming. I'm now telling my daughter, enjoy that hinterland view while you can, because I'm watching it slowly get developed out with housing estates that when you're 20, bub, that won't even be green. It'll be full of houses. And I said, that's devastating to me. And I'm sure as much as my elders seen and changed in their lifetimes, how devastated they were seeing all these green spaces be developed bit by bit on the coast without our consultation, our say-so. There is certain government departments now that are hearing, when they ring me and they go, sis, you know, what would you suggest for this site? And I just throw a heap of things at them and go, this and this, because I love watching them scramble and get their paperwork going. And I did that to them at a recent site. We're going to organise a site visit. We're taking that native title connection with us to show them what us people on ground that have never left the Gold Coast know compared to their knowledge. That we know what our community wants. We talk to our local community quite often. Like when I'm walking around the Spit, I ask people, like, what do you want here? Is it like what we want? We don't want developments. We don't want this and that. Do you guys want that? No. And then I go back to the government, tell them, and they're like, oh, well, you know, we get overruled with our opinion and our consultation. So I keep pushing, but they have played for generations on the lack of education with my family as well. My father had a year 10 education level, so when it come to writing emails, text messages, he come to me and my mother. He made sure we all got educated, the next generation, so that we wouldn't get the wool pulled over our eyes and tricked into signing off things that we didn't completely understand, like native title. I'm the big mouth at the native title meetings now, sitting there watching my elders that have a grade 8, grade 10 level education, because in their time it was you dropped out to work. We push to get educated. When we're sitting there getting dictated to by a federal government lawyer for 6 hours of signing over our culture, heritage and intellectual property, I'm the one sitting there going, stop, don't vote on that, to my aunties and my family going, you're not understanding what they're making us sign over. Think about it, and I talk to them in a general way that they don't understand the legal jargon so that they understand what we're signing over. 6 hours, by 3 hours in, my brain's really hurting and sore. And I'm looking at my family and elders going, how are they coping and surviving with this level of terms? And this is what we get put into and have to sign off. And then those people are the powers that be, the head honchos, talk for the rest of us, even though they don't talk to us, communicate. I've got representatives in local Indigenous shared groups saying they represent Komameri people. I'm like, that's one person on your board of directors. You ask him how's family, he'll scream at you, go, don't ask me about family. Oh, and you're our community rep? Cool. I'm like, I've been putting out in the community that our family has the connections. We know almost every Indigenous group and person that comes into our country and their purpose, what their goals are, and if they align with our family. And you'll see those clear lines drawn once you connect in with our mob of who's who in the zoo. That's why people are coming to us. I've had a few local principals call me Black Google. I'm okay with that. I'll help facilitate what cultural stuff I can on this country to help my fellow Gold Coasters. We've got to get it right. And I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces that I've worked with. We have similar goals to conserve this area and protect it. And that means council coming to the table and inviting us and not just going to the native title body all the time. That they've got to include the traditional owner groups on the ground. Yes, so that's what I mentioned too, the Komameri Rangers. So Lily down here is one of my cousins. She's our junior ranger. I'm training up. That's why I've gathered all my supporters on the coast. I did 7 years of doing lots of favours for groups, and then I called in all my favours when I applied for the Rangers. I applied for the Rangers every year I've been in this job and got knocked back until I connected in with the right people with the same goals that helped me drive that and get it right this time. Now we've got 4 on-country Rangers, which I'm pushing out to Burleigh Springbrook Corridor, Goonabah. Any site that you want us to go and address and look at, let us know, because like I said, we're not with council, we're not with parks, we're partnering up with them to achieve our goals, not theirs. There's no way my Rangers are going and cleaning any toilets in parks. I tell them that all the time. Not happening. We ain't cleaners. We got demeaned on the first day of our job by people in parks saying, oh, you're here to do all our small jobs. No, not at all. You'll be there to support my team, if anything. And because we're the ones with the knowledge on country. I retain knowledge from generations of aunties, uncles, grandfathers. So does Lily. And I tell my own family, you're all too city. Get out on country, walk the line and reignite those memories that are in your DNA. Because I was the same. I was a teacher. I was indoors at uni, institutionalised my whole 30 years of my life till I started this job and broke that system and narrative in my brain to say country needs our people back on it, to give back. It needs the local Aboriginal people to start learning how to preserve our country again. And that is why I tell everyone I have my team of experts around me, which is all my conservation people, all the scientists I work with, all the non-Indigenous groups that support our group. They're my team of experts, and I throw that at government. I work federal mainly, entering into state. They're valuing my input. And now my next goal is get into that local council arena and push. I'm going to let them know I'm going to be there, annoying them non-stop until they hear my people, that I'm going to line up the next generation to be exactly the same. So, yeah.
I think what Justine had to say is quite important. She's identified the fact that there are multiple interest groups and multiple voices that need to be heard in development applications. And what often happens is the assessment managers decide who is a representative stakeholder. So I think it's important that early on in the game we identify ourselves as stakeholders, state our interest, and fight to have a voice. When there's the merest whiff of a development coming up, I mean, I won't call it a whiff because for example, the cableway, you can smell that a mile coming, and that's been going on since the 90s. But deals are being stitched up, and by the time the public is formally invited to have a say on a matter, it's pretty well cut and dried. So maybe Dan would have a comment about preemptive action. There's also the issue of when do you dirty your hands? When do you start pointing out past failures of decision makers or casting doubt on their decision-making ability? It's a difficult line to walk for a formally organized group because there's punishment that can follow, but do you have some advice to the community? Some early marshalling of the forces?
Form alliances. So, good cop, bad cop. Your formal groups that are a little bit concerned about burning bridges, have another group like my group, the Fishers and Walkers group, that's more grassroots, more community-based.
Okay.
That doesn't mind bringing a rat bag or two to get involved. So that would be my first bit of advice, is to form allegiances and alliances and make it clear that you don't need to be public with that. You guys can meet with all sorts of people behind closed doors, just like they do, and you can form your own coalition and network without the need to put all your cards on the table. That's exactly what they do. So you've got to kind of play their game, but you're the good guys and they're the bad guys. So that would be my my advice. But you know, with anything, it's as soon as you know what's going on out there, you can start working on it. And you know, we were lucky with Malbina in that we had people within parks that started giving us the heads up about what was going on and leaking some documents and things like that. And without a formal body going, hey, parks staff, can you leak some stuff? Of course you can't do that, but if you have conversations off the record with certain people and someone's happy enough to do the networking and say to the right person in parks, you know, make sure you give us our stuff, or in council or whatever, that's, and you protect that person, you look after them. Yep. And that's, you know, it's a bit underhanded, but hey, it works.
I might just throw in there too, I've just been part of a founding committee member for the Queensland's First Nations Tourism Committee. So we're being a state body and our whole goal is ecotourism. There's nothing outside of that in our spectrum. So maybe we can be a body to help push some ecotourism goals, because that's all we're about. So that's something we can use as a catalyst too, I'm hoping.
Thanks, Justine. We've got a lot of good questions. I'm afraid we can't get to them all. I know Jim had a question from the audience, and another lady, I think, wanted to ask one. So we'll take two questions, if I may ask you to be short, and then we've got to move on to the final part of the program. It's getting cold. I think people are going to want to start leaving, so we'll just finish off the questions now. Jim, you had a question. Oh, could you bring him up? Keep it brief, Jim.
Wow. I do have a question, but firstly I'd like to thank Gecko for letting me come to such a beautiful, and thank the panel, the presenters who've done really well. Probably, I was 85 this week, so I might be the oldest person here, but I'm not sure, so I'm taking that privilege. But my question is, I feel a lot of spirit and passion possibly against development in the national parks. I've been very worried by the thought that our beautiful World Heritage National Parks in the Macleay-McPherson overlap might be threatened by tourism development. And I was just wondering, how do we go forward from here with such a beautiful group? Do we join Gecko? It says on the leaflet, join Gecko or become a volunteer or become a friend. Or do we need another organisation to push, if we're going to push against commercial tourism development? That's my question. Gecko or another group? Thank you.
Lois?
We didn't pay Jim to ask people to join Gecko. Well, as I said earlier, Gecko's been around for 32 years. We've honed our skills in negotiating with all levels of government, and to the point where we are considered as prime stakeholders on the Gold Coast. So we're invited to participate in forums. And in recent times, we've had some very productive interaction with Main Roads. We have a lot of protocols to follow. We want to keep going as Gecko. We want to keep going for another 32 years or longer, 132 years. And it's more fruitful to have constructive dialogue with decision makers than really irritating and annoying them, because you will be cut out of dialogue. So having a place at the table is important. We don't hold back on what we have to say by any means. We do our research, we say what has to be said, we ask what needs to be asked for, and we do fight for it, but in a respectful manner. I have the greatest respect for the campaigners who go out there and tie themselves to trees and really put everything on the line for the project. So individually, members of Gecko will do that, but as an organization, our main purpose is the protection of nature, and we're quite tightly bound by Australian legislation. If you might recall, Matt Canavan has attempted on many occasions to shut down the voice of conservation. They want heads down, bums up, pulling weeds, and that's all they want to hear from us. So we have to toe a careful line. We report on how we spend our money. It's all supposed to be on-ground work or directly related to our environmental purpose, which is in our constitution. But we certainly do lobby for sustainable use of the environment. So I hope that answers your question. But yes, maybe there is a group, room for another activist group that doesn't have those same constraints. Peter?
I'll just make a general comment about the sort of development that we're dealing with here, because the circumstances are extremely difficult for any organisation to get traction. The Kalula exercise that I talked about, and Sonia talked about as well, the proponent is not a private company, it's the Queensland government. Now, for that to proceed, it has to be put to the Commonwealth under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act for the Commonwealth government to decide whether the action is what they call a controlled action, and the Commonwealth can actually have some say in what's happening. But the proponent is actually the Government of Queensland. It's actually the Department of Environment and Science in Queensland. It's not the company that wants to build the cabins and build the resorts and do the track and charge people. It's the Queensland government, for God's sake. And this is the weird circumstance that you're trying to fight, because under the previous federal government, there was a move to devolve all that power under the the EPBC Act, Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, to the states. And you would have had a circumstance where the proponent is the Queensland government, and the Queensland government would then carry out the environmental impact study and then assess the environmental impact statement. It's crazy. And it's very difficult to deal with this sort of circumstance when you're actually fighting the government who you are going to say, don't do this, or don't allow this to happen. In fact, they're the ones that want it to happen. Very difficult to deal with.
Just make a final point. An important part of our work is liaising with other groups, working together. There's power in many voices. And a prime example was the defeat of the Springbrook Cableway when it came up. We managed to overcome that one, and the very powerful activities of people on Springbrook Mountain and across the community helped defeat that. So, as Dan said, make your relationships, work on them, strengthen them, and that gives more power to our voice. I think one final question at the back. Lady raised her arm. Is there a burning question? Yes.
Support anyone who donates their land to environmental protection and save whatever you can there. Because like Bush Heritage, Australian Conservation Society, that sort of thing, at least they give their land and they look after it.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you. So, Lois, you want to talk about the letter?
Yes. Okay, before we finish up, because I can see we're losing our audience, the last action we wanted you to take was to write directly to the Minister for Environment. And if you look at your program, there's a QR code there. If you put your phone's camera on that QR code, it will bring up the letter so that you can send it directly to the Minister. You've got the opportunity to add things to that letter if you wish. So it'll come up with a little yellow sticker saying Action Network, and you click on that. It'll take you to where you fill in your name, address and all that sort of stuff. It then takes you to the letter. You can add a bit into it or you can modify the letter, and then you can send it off. So if you can't do it right now, you can take your program with you and do it at a later time. If you don't want to do it with a phone, I've got hard copies here of the letter, and you can use those, send them off yourself, or you can drop them into Gecko or send them to Gecko and we'll send them in for you. I think it's really important that the people here who've heard all these wonderful messages from our speakers take action and let the Queensland Government know that it's simply not acceptable to have commercial development within our national parks, and that we must have the cardinal principle fully restored in the Act. Thank you.
Right, so in closing, I would just like to give some thank yous to our wonderful panel. You really performed wonderfully. You answered all our questions and you gave us the most stimulating presentation. So we hope you all found it as interesting and stimulating to make you become champions of our national parks if you weren't already. And I'd just like to this forum could not have run so successfully without a very strong leadership support team. Thank you, Barry Lee, for your IT support, Anna Itkinen, Gecko's president and events coordinator, Abby Robertson, our office administrator, and Anne Wasley for assistance with catering. We especially thank Sonia Underdahl, who has contributed so much to the planning and execution of this event, and in making sure we had the most experienced people to provide their perspectives on this important topic. And lastly, by no means least, a huge thank you to Lois Levy, founder of Gecko Environment Council 32 years ago, and a person whose drive, energy and passion for the environment ensures that Gecko continues to offer leadership as well as such high quality events to inform people and inspire them across the Gold Coast. So we look forward to some positive outcomes from this event.
And I've got to have one more ad. We've got Gecko Talks on the fourth Wednesday of every month at the Currumbin RSL. And the next one we'll have 2 or maybe 3 speakers from Council talking about the nature strategy for the Gold Coast and also the urban tree canopy strategy. Really worthwhile coming along to speak to them and listen to what they've got to say. So that's on, I think the fourth Wednesday of June is the 22nd. So come along, maybe have something to eat at the RSL beforehand, and the talk, I believe, on this occasion will start at 6, but if you check that with our website to make sure of the time. And I can assure you you'll get an ample opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.